Good morning, everybody. I'm just looking at the time. I've left it a minute or two, but there we are. We have another arrival.
Good morning.
Just car parking space as usual. Right. Good morning to members, and good morning to the public as well. And thank you both of those groups for coming this morning, as we have an agenda before us to determine. You might notice that there's a slight rearrangement up here, that we've ditched the ceremonial chairs and that we're sitting on the same chairs as you. It's not a statement about that. It's just that these are actually a lot more comfortable than those things. And if that chair is not in the exact position and you have to move them, well, pay for the next hernia operation, because they look grand and they are spectacular, but they're not always the most comfortable or practical. So I've asked for ordinary chairs. So there we are. One of my early decisions. Okay. So thank you very much for coming. We look at the agenda, and the first item is declaration of interests. So does anybody have any interest to declare? We move on to item 2, and this is confirmation of the minutes, and this was for the meeting on the 2nd of August. Seems a long time ago now. Can we agree that the minutes were a correct record of that particular meeting? Thank you. Yes. And item 3, substitute members. And I think we've got a little bit of information on that, haven't we, Catherine? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, my microphone's not working. We've had apologies from Councillor Ledger, but I've not been notified of any substitutions today.
Okay, so we are as we are. I would remind late arrivals that if a councillor was to arrive and we've already started to discuss and determine an application, that councillor can sit down and listen, but would not be able to vote or take part, because they may have missed a piece of information or whatever it is. So, you know, we better make that clear. So if you see somebody and I sort of go, you know, I might have to remind them that there is a restriction, that they're very welcome to be here, but they now have to wait till the next application. But of course, they can listen to what we're saying. Usually the protocol involves, if we've got speakers, which we have on items 1 and 5, in deference to them, just in case they've got really busy days and they have to get off and do other things, we usually put those first. So we've got item 1 as item 1, but we've also got item 5 as the next item, because we have 2 speakers potentially on both items. So the running order will begin with 1 and 5, and then we'll go back to some of the others. 3, 4, 2, 6, I think, is the order that we're looking at the moment, but that may change. So the process when we have speakers, just to remind everybody, is that the officer will make a very brief presentation, after which we will break and allow the public platform to be used, and speakers come up to the rostrum. Unless they're a ward councillor, they're confined to 3 minutes, but I'll put them in the hands of my vice chairman, Councillor Harrison, and he will look after them. So that's what we're going to do here with item 1, is ask Andrew to present the brief presentation, then we break for speakers, and then we'll go back for the full presentation. And then we'll have the debate and questions, etc. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So the item 1 on the agenda papers relates to a property called Kirkwood, which is at Church Road in Trails. The aerial image on the screen gives you an idea where it is. Obviously, it's just to the south of the M55 motorway. Trails village, or the sort of central settlement part of village, the Derby Arms and properties, is here. And then Church Road comes up to the church, and there's the primary school there, and then there's a sort of a small number of properties in that location as well. So it's a two-storey house. It's situated in a countryside location in the local plan. As I say, it's one of a small sort of enclave of development there. The application was originally submitted a couple of years ago now for a single-storey extension to the rear and the side. There has been a considerable delay with the application being progressed, which was, I think it's out of our hands. It was an issue with the plan drawer who went missing somewhere. We needed some revised plans and he was no longer available to provide them. So the single-storey extensions to the side and the rear remain in the scheme, but there's now been a detached outbuilding included as well. As a consequence of that, we've undertaken some re-notification with residents and the parish council, and they've raised an objection to the application, which is based on their concerns over the scale of the extensions to the property, breaching the limits in policy H7. I've had some interaction with the parish council about that, but they've confirmed that they wished their views to be taken as an objection. And there is some late observations that's been circulated, the second of the late observations that was circulated yesterday, which emphasises their concerns on that position. But the officer recommendation is one that remains of approval. Just to give you a little bit more context before I give word to the speakers. So this is the property. So you've got the school here, the church here, and then 1, 2 dwellings, and then some more dwellings over here. And at that point, I'll break for the speakers. I have some further images if you want to give me a bit more context for the speakers. Might not be a bad idea. This is a view from the driveway to the property. So that's the property in question, the application property. This is a 2-storey annex that's long been associated with the property and has been extended. This is the property next door, and this is its garage. The church and the school are over to the right. These are some images of the property as it was when the application was first submitted. So this is looking at the rear. So you've got the 2-storey annex, the back of the property, another view sort of alongside it, the back of the property, and then the neighbouring property. This is a view down the side between the two properties, which is where one of the extensions is proposed. And then this is a view looking out the back towards this is the location of the outbuilding now. I've carried on because I do have the zoomed in image. So this is the zoomed in image of the property. So the single-storey extensions to the property is this area here, which is effectively into that part of the property there, into this area here, which is behind a sort of a porch element here, and then the outbuilding is in the back corner where I showed the previous image across to the fields. So hopefully that gives a little bit more context to what the speakers are presumably going to say.
Thank you. And just to check, everybody did get the late observations, yes, and you've looked at them, etc., and taken into account those comments. Just to check. Thank you. I'm going to break now and go to the Vice Chair, who will introduce the speakers.
Many thanks, Chairman. I think, as has been stated already, we have the representative of Trails, Rossicas and Walls Parish Council first up, which is Parish Councillor Gordon Smith, and he will be followed by, I believe, Chris Homer of Blackburn Architecture, who is the agent representing the applicant. Just a friendly reminder to those who've not done this before, and I believe Councillor Smith, you're a regular here. We will be timing you today 3 minutes on my vintage 1980 stopwatch. 3 minutes in 1980 is the same as it is now, so no worries on that score. And I'll remind you as you're approaching the time. So without further ado.
And we do thank members of the public for being here, and speakers as well for giving their time. It's important part of the process, isn't it, Vice Chair?
Green light. Oh, good. Okay. Yes, thanks very much. Okay. Good morning, councillors. I'm Councillor Gordon Smith of Trails, Rosica and Wallis Parish Council. I've been asked to represent our parish council today and at your chairman's request to be able to answer his questions. This case appeared to be seemingly a simple assessment of an application that the officers agree does not comply with the agreed policy criteria for scale of enlargements of dwellings in the countryside. The applicable policy H7 allows for a 33% extension to the original former parish vicarage dwelling. The officers report that this application further compounds past enlargements of almost twice that allowed now, which is apparently already 59% larger than the original dwelling. Critically, there are no exemptions in the policy for houses of a certain size to be excluded from the criteria. It is understood the former vicarage is now a multi-generational family home, which presumably fulfills a family choice. The policy does not exclude large houses. They, of course, fulfil a demand. It is just that their enlargement under the current local plan is subject to well-defined criteria. You will have seen that the other aspect of policy H7 referred to in the policy on local plan page 135 and is attached in your pack is to protect against the subsequent impact of enlargements, creating urbanising features. If you visited the location, you will have seen the application site is visible to the public on 3 sides in a very rural community setting. It is adjacent to the 1850s parish church, the Grade 2 listed Trails Primary School, the church green, a public right-of-way, and parish playing fields. It is at the very heart of much of community-led activity in the parish. You'll have seen that in recent years, the environs of this very prominent public, rural, and originally single dwelling site has been subject to multiple urbanising developments. This, like policy H7 warns of and claims it is intended to avoid. The proposed extension of the dwellings is in conflict with the scale allowed for in the policy in countryside locations. It can be seen that there are emerging adverse, dominating urbanising effects as predicted by the policy justification. The full and consistent application of the policy is therefore important to conserve the characterful rural setting. The parish council has used all the material criteria and its local knowledge available to it to reach the conclusion that the application should be refused. We trust that you will apply the same best practice. That you'll ensure that sustainable development as set out in the approved local plan proceeds. However, whereas in this case, there are conflicts with the material planning policy criteria, such enlargements are refused. So to protect the amenity of this rural setting for the benefit of the community that we all represent now and in the future, thank you, and I'm here to answer your questions.
Well, actually, if I can just intervene, it's not a question and answer session. So if you've got further time, you can continue to speak.
No,
but the arrangement we have is that you make your points. So if you've got additional points to make, then you can.
Yeah, no, you've previously said that you like us to be here to answer questions and clarify points. That's why I framed it in that way.
Not in this context. No.
Right, okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. And I think we. Vice Chair.
Next speaker is Chris Homer of Black Barn Architecture, I beg your pardon, representing the applicant. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning.
So rules apply. 3 minutes. I'll give you a gentle reminder if you approach 3 minutes. Slightly less. One of you go over.
Okay, thank you.
Your own time.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. First off, I'd like to say that I'm not the designer that emigrated, and I am indeed the second designer that's been brought on to try and help resolve the issue. With regards to the specific points that were raised and the urbanising character of the developments, when viewed from the front of the property, i.e. the main public access, neither of the extensions can be seen and are both concealed behind the existing mass of the building. With regards to the query over the dominance, both sit below the existing eaves line and ridge line and use materials which are in keeping with the character of the property as was originally designed. With regards to policy H7, I think it states that it is a planning balance and that the detrimental impact of these extensions are negligible when compared with the overall mass, siting and scale of the property that sits within its boundaries. With regards to the outbuilding to the rear, this is a replacement of an existing patio space that has now been covered over to provide an outdoor kitchen space. so not fully enclosed, but open on 4 sides. There was a query that was raised within the planning officer's recommendations for approval that states there is a missing gutter on the back. This is currently, it is a live site, if you like, and that can be addressed as part of the application. So if that's a concern, whilst not a planning concern and more of a civil discussion, then that can be resolved. So I think that's the case. Thank you very much.
I think that concludes the speakers on this particular item.
Yes,
So
Chairman.
I'm going to ask the officer to continue the presentation and indeed perhaps answer some of the points that have been made by the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. So just to reiterate or recap on where we were before the speakers. So this is the property. So I think you can actually see on this is from street view, but I think you can see there's some scaffolding here which is associated with the extension to the rear. The extension is entirely to the rear, so it doesn't come to the side of the property. And then the other extension element, so it's into this area here, and I have an image that does show that area. And then the second single-story extension is into this area here, to the side of this extension. This 2-story element here is an extension that was added to the property in 2018. So my understanding is that everything other than that property, that part of the property was there when the property was built, and then this 2018 extension was added to increase the scale in that respect. These are the images. Again, that's the area to the side, looking out to the fields, and then the 3 elements of the extension. These are more contemporary pictures taken a couple of months back. So this is the single-story extension that's now been added to the rear of the property in the time between the original architect being involved and the current architect being engaged. And this is the outbuilding element to the rear that was just discussed. And perhaps picking up on that final point, one of the neighbours, the final point of the second speaker, one of the neighbours has commented with concerns over water draining off this roof onto the boundary wall, which is this wall at the other side from where this photograph was taken. There's no gutters on the building, so the completion of construction and the addition of those gutters would seemingly resolve any issues about water being directed onto the top of a boundary wall. These are the plans that have been provided by the second architect. So you can see we've got a single-story extension, as on the images. This element, single-story element to the rear here, hasn't been built, and it's kind of an extension to the single-story porch element that runs down the side of the property, and it's indicated as providing a boot room on this drawing, with this room here being used as an orangery. The indications on the plans are a little small, so that's what they say. So looking at the considerations of the application, the site is in the countryside. So policy GD4 from the local plan is the key element. That does permit extensions to properties, but relates those to policy H7. Policy H7 is specifically there to look at the scale of extensions in countryside locations. And as the parish council representative says, it's there to, it takes two approaches. One, to limit the scale of extensions, and a second, to make sure that the extensions sit comfortably in the rural surroundings. The justification for the policy refers to, or the supporting text to the policy refers to there being an issue identified at the time that the local plan was being prepared about the loss of small traditional rural properties in Fylde. So the council at the time felt that imposing a restriction on the scale of those extensions to properties was the way to deal with that. And so this policy says that anything that exceeds 33% over the original dwelling would be in conflict with the policy. And this scheme does. The original dwelling has already been extended by the two-storey extension that I showed you. And so any further extensions will be a further breach of that limit. But that's where I think the policy, and there isn't, as the parish council representative said, there aren't any restrictions in or exemptions or clarifications in the policy that says when it shouldn't apply. It says across the board. However, since the plan was adopted, we've obviously come across ways, circumstances like this, where there have been large properties, where there have been properties that have had large extensions between their original construction and the determination of the new application. Some of those have been tested at appeal, and where we've sought to refuse applications simply because they exceed 33%, irrespective of the size of the property, we've lost those appeals. So since the local plan was adopted, or shortly after the local plan was adopted, we've adopted a consistent approach whereby if the property isn't a small property to start with, or if it is a property that has had previous large extensions, then we cannot realistically apply the 33% limit. And that's been the case for the last 4 years or so since appeal decisions led us down that road following the adoption of the plan in 2018. Those are the circumstances here. The extension, the property's already been extended by more than 33%, and this extension obviously adds to that. But the starting point is that it never was a property that was a small traditional home. If you recall the images, it's a substantial two-storey dwelling. I think it has 5 bedrooms. It was, available to marketed many years back, 2011, I think it was, for £600,000. It's not a small property. And in those circumstances, as I said, policy H7, whilst this scheme is in conflict with that policy, the material considerations are that because of the scale of the property, it cannot realistically be said to be a small rural property, and therefore it cannot realistically be the case that that policy conflict, that academic policy conflict, if you will, can lead to the application being refused. We do need to look at the second part of the policy, which is the relationship to the house and the surrounding areas. And having done that, officers feel that these are single-storey extensions. They are to the rear. They are constructed in bricks and use design detailing that reflect the original property. The roofs to the porch element is hipped and slated like the original property. So we feel that there's no conflict with that second strand of policy H7. We've looked at the neighbour amenity, which is to the single residential property. I've already talked about the guttering element, but in terms of the relationship to that property as a neighbour to neighbour scale of extension relationship, we're satisfied that there's no impact or harmful impact on amenity. Just covering on the outbuilding, it is clearly, from the image, it's a substantial structure. It does sit in quite a regimented garden arrangement. It does have stylings and materials that reflect that host dwelling. So again, officers feel that is acceptable. Outbuildings and garages and things are exempt from the H7 test in the way that we've had to interpret it since the plan was adopted. So there isn't an issue with that element either. And in the absence of any other sort of material considerations or other relevant issues, I'd put the application to you to be granted as on the agenda papers.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments, etc.? Councillor Farrington? Councillor Nixon. Councillor Pittman.
My initial thought was that this is almost one of those thin end of the wedge scenarios where you set a precedent, but then you've clearly stated that there have been appeals to other properties, and we've lost the appeal. So that sort of blows that idea out the water. If there's already case law in effect that prevents that view. But I just wonder, the other appeals, I think sometimes the devil's in the detail. Are they comparable? Can you remember? Is this potentially setting a precedent? I'm just worried about waving something through that really gives other properties and people around the Fylde coast, our borough, to just use this as the stick to beat us with.
The Fylde as a borough has extensive areas of countryside. It's not clearly very rural. We have had a lot of applications in the time since the local plan was adopted where there are proposals to extend properties. They are all tested against this, and they are all tested against policy H7. And it very quickly became apparent after the adoption of the local plan, which is when that policy came into being in 2018, that there were difficulties in the way the policy was worded because of circumstances like this. There's an appeal referenced in the agenda papers on page 10. There have been others, and there have been many applications like this where we've followed the line that pointed to us by the appeal decisions. So this isn't creating a precedent in terms of approving this scheme. What it's doing is following the way that we've consistently applied the policies since 2018. And I think a refusal here would be the thing that kind of upset the apple cart in terms of the way that we've made previous decisions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. How many appeals have we actually lost on these sort of grounds?
I can't give you an exact figure, Council, I'm afraid. It's probably not that many, probably 2 or 3 perhaps, but that's because we quickly realised that because we were losing them, we had to take a more realistic interpretation of the way that the policy was worded. Look at what the justification says. The justification says it's this section here, 9.84, which talks about small traditional homes being replaced by larger homes. And it's inspectors looked at that and said, or inspectors were directed to that by appellants saying, I have a 5-bedroom house. It's not a small rural traditional home. So therefore, an extension to this isn't sort of exacerbating the problem that the policy is aimed at. And the inspectors found in that view, and so we've sort of been guided by that in terms of the way that we've dealt with applications since.
If it helps, I turned up the appeal decision that was referred to in, apologise, I haven't the microphone. Turned up the appeal decision, the many views appeal decision that was referred to. It's quite a small, a short one. It comes down to one pithy paragraph in paragraph 10, where the inspector says this: the appeal property already has 4 bedrooms. Justification for policy H7 is for the retention of smaller properties, and by implication those with less than 4 bedrooms, and the extension would not, in this case, weaken the council's desire to protect the stock of smaller dwellings. That encapsulates the inspector's reasoning, which clearly went against what the council's thoughts were at the time, but has to be taken fully into account as Andy's advised.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Just another point. It's definitely an orangery area. It's not going to be a flat roof that would enable a balcony of any sort to come off from the first floor. Yeah, you can see the windows in the top of it, can't you? That's, yeah, it's not going to have, what I was concerned of, if you put a flat roof on that area, you automatically give yourself opportunity to have, because on that picture it looks like a flat roof, but there's no glass in it.
Yeah, on that image, there's obviously it's partly under construction at that point. There's no windows in it or anything, but the application is for a single story extension. If there were to be a balcony element there, that would be further development, and that would need to be subject to a planning application.
Okay.
And there's no indication of that being put forward at this time. Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I'll just say some of these questions I think are getting to the nub of the issues here. Is that obviously, you know, we have a policy, and at one look at it, it appears to breach that particular policy, and then you have to put it in the context in terms of how that is seen by a series of planning inspectors, etc., and how the policy might have been designed for a certain situation, a certain type of property. And we need to take cognizance, I think, of the actual property and the application that is before us in terms of how this policy seemingly applies. And that's why it's important to take into account, I think, the paragraph that Mr. Curtis read out from a particular planning appeal. But, you know, I'm very grateful for the questions from members, because I think we are debating the real issues here. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. You stole my thunder a little bit there again, but to that end, we've got the parish council who obviously want to maintain the area and the integrity of the area, and we've also got a policy which is an evolving process, and it's a guideline. And thank you, Mr. Curtis, for setting that out. Obviously, this isn't a small property to start off with. I think it's interesting that, as I understand it, the initial extension was done in 2018, which is about the same time as the policy actually came into being. So I'm not quite sure chronologically which one came first, but it may well have been that this possibly would have been flagged up if the policy was in place in the first place, but we are where we are. And so while there is a certain amount of ambiguity to the process, it obviously can't be black and white, and we have to apply the current circumstances against the plan in its aims, so that we can keep that integrity of the local areas. My only other concern would be, this is quite obviously a large property and it's set in its own ground, but there is a certain concern for the immediate neighbours that the properties seem to creep closer and closer to the boundaries. And it's difficult for Andrea, because you can't say you can do this but you can't do that in a way, but I can understand there's concern there that as it gets bigger and bigger, it encroaches on them. So I think it's very, very important that we do insist that the remedial work is done to the gazebo that stops that water runoff onto the neighbouring property. And the only other thing I can say is, like when we've looked at bigger plans in terms of the landscaping and things like that that's done around it, anything that can minimise the impact on the immediate locale is important, in the same way as it would be for an industrial estate. It obviously is more so for the countryside as well. Thanks very much, Chair.
I'm going to hand you back to Andrew, but just to remind you as well that, you know, as well as the 8-7 policy, part of that is respecting the character of the original building and the surrounding rural area. So that's a secondary factor as well that we have to take into account, which I think, you know, Andrew can comment on further. Thank you.
Picking up on, and thank you, Chairman, picking up on the second points there, I've put these images back on the screen. These show that I mean, obviously it was taken in winter time, but these show that there are elements of landscaping in the garden already. It wouldn't be something that I would look to impose a landscaping condition on a domestic dwelling. I think that's perhaps a little bit, you know, a bit too far in terms of sort of nanny state planning. But there is that setting in the garden with trees and shrubs and things. The picture on the left shows the relationship between where the single-storey extension to the rear of the boot room extension is proposed. I think there is some perhaps uncertainty or whatever about where the exact boundary is between the properties. The applicant has been asked to confirm that it's entirely on their land. They have done that, and that's as far as we can go in terms of a planning decision. If there are private issues between the neighbours, then that is something for them to resolve privately about the exact position of a boundary. Coming back to the chronological question you asked earlier, the agenda on page 7 lists the planning history, and the bottom of that is application 18208, which was granted on the 26th of April 2018. The local plan was adopted in October 2018. So whilst it was before the adoption of the plan, it was before the adoption of the plan. Yeah. So it is a time when the emerging policy H7 wouldn't have had the development plan weight, and therefore we would have been on sort of thin ice in terms of refusing an application for that two-storey extension that you can see in the right-hand picture there. Going back to your points, going to your first point, whilst it looks like we're approving something that conflicts with the policy, there are also many instances where we've refused applications or given people pre-application advice that we wouldn't be able to support an application for a proposal that would breach that policy. So the policy still has weight. It is applied consistently by the team, and it's just a case that if you've got a 3-bedroomed house or below and you're looking to extend it by more than 33%, then that's going to be problematic. Whereas if the house is the larger size that Mr. Curtis highlighted for the inspector, then realistically we're not going to be able to resist a big house being made bigger.
I'm coming to Councillor Pittman and then Councillor Collins first, and then I'll see if there are any further questions. So, Councillor. And can I say that when you read the report and you consider this, all of the questions, legitimate questions that members are raising this morning are there at the back of your mind, and that's the reality of it. But we have to make planning judgments, and that's our remit. And we have to, I suppose, also, the word balance all sorts of factors here, that there might have been other factors that could have tipped the balance, that it still might not have been possible to actually accept this. And all of your questions are helping us to sort of discuss and explore these particular points, which is, I think, really useful, and why when we have these points, I then ask the officer to address, and there's a bit of a pattern here that that hopefully will help to answer some of the questions and concerns. Doesn't always, but you know, some of the time it will and some of the time it won't. Andrew.
Thank you again, Chairman. Yeah, just to perhaps reassure Councillor Pittman about this, the sentiments that you expressed were exactly the reason that the planning policy 87 was brought in. It was there to deal with the scale issue where small properties were being made larger. Obviously, we've discussed at length about what happens about large properties, but it also has this second element that talks about replacement homes, but it also applies to extensions where those works are reflecting the character of the property. Here, we've got window designs that have got this sort of triangular top to them, bricks, very vertical windows, brick materials, slate roof. So that you are reflecting the policy here. But if the proposal was, irrespective of the size, if the proposal here was to put a fully glass or white rendered extension on the property, then that wouldn't be satisfying the Part B. So we would still have that, have that control over the appearance of the extension to avoid the Georgian follies or whatever the phrase was that you were concerned about.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chairman. The existing extension is 59% of the original footprint. And this is a further extension to that. In addition, there's the gazebo, which we don't take into account, but the policy is there to maintain the supply of smaller houses, to make sure they don't get too big. Now, if I had a small house next door and I wanted to make it bigger, and I was told it's limited to 33%, my neighbour's already got 59%, and he's making it bigger still, and he's putting a gazebo on. I'd be pretty miffed. Now, I might look round for a bigger, small house. There might not be one available. If I apply for 40%, I'd be told it's in conflict with policy 87 and it's to be refused. Now, we need the confidence of the public, of the parish councils, when we look at a policy, to be able to make an informed decision, just looking at the policies. So from what Mr. Stella said, the sheer scale, the percentage increase in the size is not grounds for refusal. But the overdevelopment, the scale and the urbanising effect, I think are grounds for refusal. Mr. Stella said it can't be seen from the road. Well, does that mean if you've got a big house and you've got a big garden, you can build it forever as much as you want, as long as it can't be seen from the road? But this, it can be seen from three sides. We've got the church, a grade 2 listed skill building. We've got the right of way. It's the parish playing field, immediately adjacent to it. Now, this isn't just a house in the middle of St. Anne's, whatever. Trails is a small place, but this is the centre of the community. And this is an overdevelopment of that site. Now, I can't support this. What I would propose is that we have a site visit for other members of the committee to go down and actually see this application site before they make a decision. So I propose deferment for a site visit.
Do you have any support for that?
Chair, I would support that, please.
Can we have a response in terms of some of the points?
Yes, I think Councillor Collins' point related to the visibility of the extensions in the rural setting, wasn't it, particularly?
Well, it's overdevelopment, it's the urbanising effect. It's just when you look at the list of applications, it just goes on and on and on. And there's nothing to say that this is the last application that's going to come before this committee on this site.
Yeah, but whilst there may well be future applications, obviously the committee will be aware that this is the application that we do need to determine. The extension is to the rear, or the two extensions and the outbuilding are all to the rear of the property. Public access points are available from Church Road. That's the main viewing point, I would say. You've got this driveway arrangement that serves the church. So that is obviously in use for church functions, and also it's used, I think it's used for school access as well. So there are views into this area, but again, I'm not convinced that the extensions to the rear of the property here are particularly prominent in those views. They are visible from the playing fields to the rear, so there is public access into the rear of the property. They are visible from the garden to the neighbouring property here. They're largely screened from the church by this two-storey outbuilding that you've seen on the pictures. So whilst the property is getting bigger under this proposal, it's in a reasonably large plot, and I don't believe that the scale of the extensions are ensuring that it becomes particularly urban in any real vantage point, given that the extensions are to the rear, they are single storey, and that the access to the rear, there's no public footpaths or anything, are generally restricted. Church Road does sweep round, so there are more distant views across as Church Road sweeps round and rises. It's just off the image here, but it rises over the motorway, so you will get glimpses on the road of it in that sort of context. But I'm not of the view that it's particularly prominent, particularly urbanising, and hence that's why the officer recommendation is one that's for approval.
I mean, I'm personally satisfied that we've got enough information to make a judgment on this, but if we've heard a request and supported, I'm quite happy to put it to the committee. If that's something that you want, we can vote on it. I personally don't think we need it. I think we've got enough information. We've got background information in terms of planning appeals, etc., how these things are looked at, and therefore that's my view. But it's been proposed, Councillor Collins, so I'm quite willing to get members' views on this and take a vote on it, if that's acceptable.
Could I give a view on that? And I think Councillor Collins has potentially undermined his own point at the start when he said policy 87 is intended to maintain, and you use the word maintain, the smaller affordable properties. This clearly never was a smaller affordable property. It was a vicarage which would have been a large property. It would not simply have been a residence, it would have been a working property back in the day. That's what vicarages were. It's at some point being given permission to be converted into a large residential property. On that basis, I wouldn't support the proposal you're putting forward, Councillor Collins.
But with your permission, I think I'm going to put it to members just to give their views on this, because if there was a general view from the committee that they wanted a site visit, then it can be expressed and we would listen to that. So those in favour of the site visit, please indicate. And those who feel it's unnecessary, please indicate. We're moving on to Councillor Farrington again.
Just a very small technical point. I mean, when I look at all this unbalance, I think Andrew's answered and the questions well in relation to with the photos. You can see that it fits in with the general architecture of the back with strange neo-Gothic window design, but hey-ho, it is consistent along the back. There was talk in the paper about the effects of shadows. You can see from the orientation on the map that the section to the left of the new extension might, towards sunset, have a fractional shadow, but it might be, I'm not sure if it even will, given the level. But I think clearly in the photo you can see what you term as the boot room. Even on your photo you can see probably the afternoon sunshine. It's going to block out light from the neighbouring property. But what you can't see on the picture is whether there's windows on that side of the building. Will it impinge on their light in any way? So could you view that as a separate part to the left section?
Let's hear what the officer has to say regarding that point, Councillor Parrington.
There are windows to the front and to the rear of this element of the neighbouring property. So the single-storey extension in here brings development closer to them, but it's already virtually a courtyard by the existing building and the two legs of the neighbour's property already. You saw on the image you've got a relatively high fence, so the potential impact is the enclosure of that area above that fence into that corner. Given that you can see the scale of the two-storey element of the neighbouring property there, so it's a worsening of the existing situation, but I'm not convinced, and obviously the case officer, when they looked at the application, they weren't convinced that the impact there is one that was so harmful that it would justify a refusal of the application on that basis. So it's a planning judgment that we would make on a regular basis, where you have extensions that clearly come closer to neighbouring properties, and you make an assessment as to whether the harm's going to be acceptable or not. You've made some comments on lights and sunlight angles and that kind of thing, and that's what we would be doing as part of the site assessment, and that's why the case officers come up with the recommendation to approve it.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just a supplementary question, really, Andrew. The immediate neighbour there, has that neighbour objected to this application or not?
They've expressed concerns. Microphone again. They've expressed concerns. They're the neighbour referenced in the report. So they've expressed concerns about the impact of the extension that we've just discussed, and they've also expressed the concerns about the about the water dripping onto the brick wall between the two properties that we discussed 3/4 an hour ago.
Okay. I mean, Chair, I'm happy realistically with the information that Andrew provided. I don't think it's about making policy on the hoof. I think it's about applying the policy and then looking at the immediate set of circumstances for each dwelling and each planning application as it comes up. It would always be better if we could be in a situation where we're able to give planning permission for these before they start, rather than looking at something afterwards. But we are where we are. But I think, as you say, these developments are within an existingly large property. It's within the footprint of the property. And although I accept the parish's concerns about maintaining the village as it is and maintaining the property and using the tools that we put in place, maybe it's something that we have to revisit again in terms of policy down the line. But from the presentation that you're given today, I'm minded to accept. Thank you. I propose.
Do we have a second? We have a proposer and a seconder for approval, and so I think we've had a very full debate and some very good questions. A lot of issues have been raised legitimately, as I say, but we're moving to the vote. So all those in favour, please indicate. And all those against, please indicate. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Collins.
In policy H7, it's just a blanket statement, no extensions above 33%. Now, if that's changed as a result of appeal decisions, when do we look at that policy and rewrite it so that parish council, town councils can look at the local plan and be confident when they're being consulted, when they're expressing an opinion to the officers and to this committee?
I think, yeah, but I think that's a very valid point, Councillor Collins, and it's something that I was already considering asking about that, because, it obviously is a source of some contention, in terms of, whilst we understand the logic and the rationale behind the decision we've made, there is a policy there and there's an apparent breach of that policy. But in reality, you know, it seems that things have changed since the local plan, and the application to larger properties, we're being encouraged by inspectors to see things very differently. We've just heard that from the statement that was read out by Mr. Curtis. So it would be worthy of looking at in terms of how we interpret that policy.
Also, Chairman.
That, by the way, that might be something that would be worthy of one of the items that the newly set up planning forum as well.
Yeah.
For the district and parish liaison. It's a legitimate one that we could look at.
Can I comment on those?
Yeah, just to help the committee on that, the planning, the policy is obviously part of the local plan. The way to review it is through a review of the local plan. We went through a partial review process in terms of looking specifically at housing numbers 2020 and 2021. Work on reviewing the local plan in full is currently paused pending government progressing primary legislation that's expected to change how that process works. So filed as with most local authorities is not progressing on local plan work because the government said it's going to change the legislation. So why do something that you think is going to change? The government actually published a new MPPF last night. So about 10 o'clock. So it may be that that they are looking at getting the legislation brought forward. So that may well clear the blockage, the legislative blockage, and allow councils to think about progressing local plans. But I'm sure that this finessing the policy wording here will be one of the subjects that will be best to discuss through that more formal process. We've been able to interpret it successfully as a development management team, irrespective of the clear discussions that we've had today about some of the failings of the wording. But it would be better if it was clearer. I accept that. So I think that local plan review is the forum for that to be done.
Okay, but that doesn't necessarily either preempt or exclude some discussion of planning forum, you know, with district liaison, because it's an area of concern. So legitimately, even if that is the response, that, you know, it's through the local plan review that probably
the discussion of that nature could well inform how that element is dealt with when we do get to the local plan review.
Yeah, so points put forward could be used when we get to that stage.
The existing local plan, I think it's for 15 years into 2017 to 2032. There was talk of a local plan only lasting 5 years. Am I right?
Yeah.
Is that the legislation you're referring to?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Are we? Could a new local plan be coming forward well before 2032?
The legislation talks about plans being reviewed at least every 5 years. So the current local plan was adopted the partial review of the local plan was adopted in December 21. So we're obviously about halfway through that period now. So that's why this seemingly emerging policy legislation situation is key. So I think it is, you know, we should be girding as loins to get round to that, doing that now.
So discussion that we've had certainly can be, you know, taken forward in other forums, etc., and have an effect in terms of determining the next stage. So, okay, thank you, Councillor.
Me again. Item 5 relates to a commercial premises called The Rooms, which is a guest house on Church Road in Lytham. So red circle there, probably midway between the square and cricket club on Church Road. I think there's a 6-bedroom guest house, B&B, operated since 2005. It's outside of the designated town centre, but it is in the settlement area, as you saw from the image. Planning permission was granted 2020 to use the dining room element of the building, so that's half of the ground floor, for meals and that will be available to non-guests. As a B&B, obviously it offers meals for guests, but the planning permission granted in 2020 allowed that to be extended to non-guests. That was subject to a 6 p.m. termination, and the application here is to extend that to 10:30. The obvious intention to allow evening meals to be provided in the premises. This is at committee because the original planning permission was granted at committee, and the scheme of delegation requires variations of conditions to be brought back to committee. In this case, the recommendation is to approve the application as officers are satisfied that the level of or the potential for harm, particularly noise harm, to neighbouring properties is limited by the scale and the layout of the premises. Just to try and set some context to the speaking. So this is the property in question on the left. So it's attached to a care home, but all the other land uses are residential around it. And then this is a floor plan of the ground floor. So this dotted red box, that's the front door. Come in the front door. To the right is the manager's accommodation, which is the part that's attached to the care home. To the left is the dining area, and then through the back in the outrigger is the orange, brown, yellow, which is the kitchen facility. And then this red square is an external courtyard area that's also used for or available for use for dining. So the variation in front of us, and I'll break after this slide, is simply to change the wording of the condition from the top to the bottom to extend it for those into those hours.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll hand over to the Vice Chair now.
Many thanks, Chairman. So I believe we have two speakers on this. The first is Mr. Geoffrey Fielden, who is objecting. I think if you'd like to come up, Mr. Fielden, if you recall from the previous one, 3 minutes in your own time. I will give you a gentle reminder as you approach that, and the last gentle one if you go over.
Thank you very much.
Time, so.
Will do.
I don't think the Vice Chair does gentle.
I'm sure he doesn't. It doesn't. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before the committee today. The current planning permission has a very sensible condition, and that is the hours of operation, which are restricted to 8 till 6. And the reason for that condition was to limit the potential for noise and disturbance to safeguard our immunity as neighbours. I live directly next door at 33 Church Road. And to my mind, only 2 things have happened since that affect this condition, since this permission was granted. Firstly, we now have direct experience of 3 years of operations of this premises as a commercial dining establishment, and has feared the noise and disturbance arising from the external courtyard area are considerable. This area can be occupied by up to 8 diners. Our garden, dining area and bedroom are directly adjacent to this external courtyard area. The noise is noticeable and detrimental to the peaceful enjoyment of our residential property. Every day we look forward to 6 p.m, comforted with the knowledge that this is the time that the external courtyard area will be closed for commercial dining. The prospect of this condition being removed, thereby allowing the hours of operation to be extended to 10:30 at night, is deeply troubling. It will allow that noise to continue to 10:30 and then to start again at 8 o'clock the following morning. This is a very, very upsetting proposition. The second thing that has happened is a noise assessment report. This noise assessment report that was submitted with the application considerably underestimates the noise. It is all based upon theoretical calculation. And we can say this with some confidence because we have experienced the actual noise for the last 3 years. Statements in the noise assessment report, such as it is extremely likely that any noise would be, any activity would be inaudible, are demonstrably untrue. And I've explained in my letter why these theoretical calculations are so flawed. Very briefly, they're based upon a single voice conversation when this external courtyard area can be occupied by up to 8 people. 4 conversations going on in a lively restaurant setting with waiting staff and a host who has as I'm sure you'll hear later, has a wonderfully distinctive voice which resonates around the courtyard. If those correct factors are used, then you get a noise level that is comparable with that is actually experienced. And it is considerably greater than that would require mitigation measures to be put in place. Given all of this, I'm extremely disappointed by the Planning Department's recommendation to grant permission. I urge the committee to consider my comments when coming to your decision. I would note that there have been 11 objections from local neighbours in this respect. And I would like you to take that into account, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fielden. If now we could hear from Mr. Andrew Baker, the applicant. And again, sir, same rules apply, 3 minutes and in your own time.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, councillors. I've owned the rooms in Leatham for 18 years. I've been operating for 18 years. And the last few years, we've made some changes. We opened up our dining facility to non-residents to try and help improve our income, really, because things have become very difficult since COVID. The trend for visitors has dropped off a little bit, and it's made trading difficult. We've been reasonably successful with our cafe. But now we need to take it a bit further because in the last 18 months, as I'm sure everyone's aware, mortgages have gone through the roof, facility bills have gone through, everything has increased. We applied for our variation and we did our report, and our report's come back and it's fine. It's been approved by the council's environmental department. It's not going to be a noisy, rowdy place. I can understand Jeff's point of view. The fact that he thinks I'm a bit noisy, I can't help that. I do live on the site. I have a London distinctive accent. I've lived here for 23 years. We've never had a complaint in 18 years about our property. We've always maintained to try and keep the peace with our neighbours, both sides, and we need this application because we need to increase our business. If we don't, who knows? I understand that there was 11 objections, and I also understand there was also one person that said, yeah, thumbs up, we think this will be okay. We're not planning a rowdy establishment. We're just looking to serve food and beverages beyond the hour of 6 o'clock. If we stop at 6, we miss out on things like baby showers, we miss out on christenings, we miss out on a few events, even to the extent that we're actually not, we're trying to get business from funeral parties coming, and saying their farewells. I hope you'll approve, but thank you for your time. Thank you.
I think that concludes all of the speakers on this item, Vice Chair. So and can I thank the speakers for being here today and their contribution to this process. It's really important that we hear what you have to say. Yeah. Take you back to the officer who will resume his presentation for this particular item.
Okay, just perhaps as a recap again. So the premises, manager's flat, I'm pointing at the screen, perhaps use a cursor. Manager's flat here separates the ground floor from the adjoining care home. To the other side, there is a passageway, and then we have the neighbouring property, which is obviously the first speaker. So they are not attached, albeit you can see they are very, very closely related to it. Kitchen area to the rear. And if I show you these images of the premises, so this is, top one is from the front, so you can see the sign here. So it's this building here, with the rest of this building being the care home. Neighbouring property, that's the passage between the two. So this will be the neighbouring property here where the first speaker occupies. This is a very poor picture, but this shows the rear of the building. So this is the external courtyard area. This is perhaps a better pictures of the courtyard. So the courtyard's flanked by the back of the guest house, the outrigger part of the guest house behind this foliage, and then the neighbouring property to the side here, which obviously is immediately next to it. Internally, two images here. This is the one on the left, looking at the front. Stood with my back to the front window. So that's the scale of the dining area internally. These doors open to the courtyard element to the rear, and then in this part of the building here is where the kitchen element is. So that's the rear outrigger. This is just the image looking the other way. You can see Church Road and the properties through the window there. So there is I think there's 18 covers internally and 6 or 8 covers. I don't have the exact figure. 8 covers externally in the area to the rear. So again, considerations that we're looking at here. It's in the settlement. It's a well-established hospitality sector use from the 18 years of being a B&B. There was a history where the planning permission was granted by committee after a premises licence had been granted. This application was then submitted without a noise assessment, the one that we've got today. A noise assessment was then supplied, and the council's environmental protection team confirmed that they didn't have any objections to it. They found that it was a reasonable approach to go with the production of a noise assessment for that type of use. So perhaps the fair question is, what's different now to what was different in 2020? Well, in terms of the geography, in terms of the planning policy, in terms of the neighbour relationships and land use, nothing has changed. So what we do have is that we have the updated noise assessment. We do have the factual layout that there is that separation between the dining area and the adjoining property. Obviously, there's less separation in terms of the external area. There is the control over the numbers. There's no proposal to expand the numbers or expand the area that those covers are provided within. And obviously, we've heard the applicant refer to the business benefits it brings to him, and clearly those are expanded across the visitor economy of the town as a whole. There have been points raised about other amenity factors such as odour and refuse storage. There were conditions in terms of the original planning permission about arranging appropriate measures for refuse storage. Those would stay in place. So officers have looked at the noise element and have taken the balanced approach that the extension of the hours as proposed is something that they would be able to support, hence the recommendation. The only other issue of note that's been raised is about parking. There isn't any parking at the site, but there is parking outside available, roadside parking available. Clearly there are pressures on roadside parking, but the area is relatively accessible from car parks that serve the town centre as a whole. Obviously, it's on a bus route. It's within walking distance of many residential areas. So the absence of parking wasn't an issue. And whilst the extension of the hours perhaps changes the parking into times when people are more likely to be at home rather than at work, we don't feel as officers that there's any issues with that would create a concern for this decision. So, as I said, the key issue I think is the noise, weighing up the noise impacts on neighbouring properties, and the officer view to you is that the scheme is an acceptable one, and planning permission can be granted on that basis.
And I'll bring in speakers in a moment, but just to clarify that this outside area, just to confirm this, is currently being used, but only by people who stay at the guest house outside, or is it not used at all to the hours that are being suggested?
Yeah, it is my understanding, my understanding is that the facility, the site can operate for guests. It can offer meals for guests at any time.
Outside and in.
Outside and in. The planning permission that was granted relates to non-guests and widening the scope of the use to allow non-guests to be catered for at the premises.
Okay, thank you.
Just very briefly as well, before we go on to the speakers, maybe a point of clarification. Notwithstanding whether we as a committee grant or refuse, presumably any change to operating hours would also be subject to a further licensing application. Is that the case?
That's a question.
Yes, sorry. Distracted by something else. The property, because it's providing a food element and food and drink element, it's subject to premises licensing, well, subject to food hygiene licensing. It's subject to all sorts of other legislation as well as the planning permission legislation.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, my understanding of this, it's 8 till 6 that is outside is an available amenity. Outside, yeah, but this is mainly about the outside. So in 2 weeks' time, 6 o'clock, you're going to be sort of hitting like a dark period. What lighting is going to be provided to sit outside from and sit outside out eating? Because lighting, would imagine, is part of a planning consideration, but it's not even mentioned about how you're going to light that. You're not going to sit outside in the dark. What lighting is there?
Yeah, there is no indication of any illumination of that external area. There's no, from my site visit, I don't recall there being any light there.
So basically, it's not even really usable.
You wouldn't need planning permission to install lights onto the exterior area of a building.
No, I don't get how it would even be viable to use it then at that time of night if there's no lighting. How could you use it?
Sorry,
I can't see where you're going.
Sorry, you wouldn't require planning permission if this permission was granted and they were able to trade to that time. The operator would be able to install lights without the need for planning permission if they're attached to the building. If they were to put spotlights up and floodlights, then that would be a different matter. But if they were to attach lighting to the building to illuminate this external area, then they would be able to do that without planning permission.
What's the difference between lighting and spotlights and floodlights? There would have to be some sort of a spotlight, floodlight.
Planning legislation allows the fitting of lights to the external area of a building without that involving planning permission being required. If you were to mount them on poles, then it's the mounting on poles that means you need planning permission.
So there could be, I mean, if you are going to use that, you're going to have to use it with lighting. Yeah, you have to. You can't sit out in the dark. So there is going to be a light element for the neighbours impacting on there must be.
Can I just come in here, because currently, this is why I wanted that clarification, Councillor Nixon, that this clearly operates as a dining area now in the evening, not up to 6 o'clock, but later in the evening till whatever, 10:30 for residents. So you can see where I'm coming from. So presumably in an area, regardless of whether we think there's sufficient light, and we hear whether it's a planning consideration or not, currently there are obviously people, and I'm not making this a plus, it's just a fact that they are dining in the evening in that area now, but they happen to be residents.
I think we move.
Later on in the year, it's going to be
I'm
dark.
not making it as a plus or four here, as a minus, simply clarifying that this is already being used as a dining area by residents.
I think we're moving well into the realms of speculation and away from the actual planning application that's before us here. We're in danger of being sidetracked, aren't we?
Have you got any other points you want to raise?
No, I don't get how it can be used. I'd be.
And you're
I just don't
perfectly
get how-
entitled to raise these points, and
Yeah.
sometimes they may be valid points, we can clarify that, but, you know.
I just, yes, in the summer I can see it being a lovely, nice courtyard area to sit outside, eat. In the winter, I don't see how it can be used, so it won't be used.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Settle, please.
Thank you, Chairman. My original comment, I'm not sure is relevant now, because what Andrew said, that for residents, they can already use that area until 10:30 at night. What I was going to suggest, and I do sympathise with the first speaker, that it's a densely packed area that I don't think I would like people chattering away in that dining area till 10:30 if I'm next door, and particularly if I'm in the care home. What I was going to suggest was, and I understand that the proposal wording talks about up till 10:30. It doesn't differentiate between the internal area and the external area. As you want to suggest, just have dining till 10:30 in the internal area, not the external area. But you sort of confuse that by saying diners, guests can already dine outside until 10:30. Which rather confused my argument there. But I still sympathise with the first speaker. So the only benefit of refusing the application would be that you would probably have a lot less diners outside, because there are only now guests, not people just coming in for a meal. So I am still inclined to object to the proposal on the principle of the actual noise in this very densely packed area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We ought to remind people as well that there has been a noise assessment, and the environmental protection team, for what that is worth, that they have opined that they're satisfied with the noise levels. But we've also heard, from a speaker that, in his opinion, that there is considerable noise within the courtyard, and that's detrimental and can be. But thank you for that.
Chairman, do you want to?
I'm going to bring Andrew back, because he has to respond to one or two things.
Yeah, well, perhaps just picking up on the Councillor Settle's point there, the condition as worded simply deals with internal and external dining as the same. But there are we have imposed conditions on other planning permissions for other premises around the town where we have differentiated between internal and external areas. So that is something that we could do here. So we could have a condition that said, as you've got on the agenda papers, and then added on that the consumption of food and drink in the external area is limited to between 8 and 6. That wouldn't prevent guests from using that area, but it would perhaps bring greater control than is currently available on the recommendation. It will potentially bring some enforcement concerns in terms of how we monitor whether you're a guest or not a guest, but that's perhaps something for the committee to think about.
Am I missing something? Because isn't that the status quo? Isn't that, at the moment, residents can eat out there till 10:30, And what we're saying here, the application is to actually allow non-residents to eat out there till 10:30.
Well, the application, Chairman, sorry if I wasn't clear earlier, the application is for the whole building.
Yeah.
For non-guests.
Obviously, but which would include the outside.
Yeah.
And non
Interesting.
Sorry, yes.
Right.
All right, yes, Karen.
It's really important to clarify these points.
Right, non-residents can't eat inside till 10:30.
Because I think this is crucial, which is why I asked for clarification on
The
this.
current situation is that as a guest house, you are able to have meals whenever, if you are a guest,
Whether inside or outside.
inside or outside.
Mhm.
This application relates to opening up the premises to non-guests and who are currently able to dine at the premises between 8 and 6. And the application is to allow non-guests to dine internally and externally between 8 and 10:30.
So my comment's still valid that you can have a
Correct.
Councillor Evans, waiting patiently in the wing.
It's a bit of an okey cokey, isn't it, really, inside, outside? I mean, speaking as a caterer myself, obviously, and somebody as a licensee, so I've got a little bit of understanding here but I want to draw us back to the first speaker's comments, because the first speaker, as my understanding would be, indicated that at 6 o'clock, we look forward to a 6 o'clock when things calm down, quieten down. So whether or not residents of the premises can utilise outside space after that time, from the inference would be that at this moment in time they're not doing so, or they're not doing so to an extent that would cause noise issues. The concern is, with the pushing back of this time and the serving 3 till 10 o'clock, that time frame of noise will be extended. So I could do with that. I'd like some clarification on that.
Yeah,
there are obviously...
I got the same, I came to the same conclusion that obviously, you know, the residents who are utilising the outside area are using it to an extent that doesn't seem to be a huge problem.
But that was in...
But with non-residents adding to those numbers, you potentially, particularly on fine evenings, going to have
Yeah, well, the
a lot
operation
more
at the
people
moment is...
accessing that area.
The operation at the moment is sort of curtailed at 6 o'clock, and what we've been asked to look at now is to bring what we would call an evening service or an evening offering into that, which then pushes the noise on. There are bifold doors there from inside, so whether people are sat inside or outside, the noise does carry from inside into the outside area. You've also then got associated background noise from the kitchen area, staff finishing off work afterwards, extraction fans, all that kind of thing. But that needs to be put into the context of, there's the Chinese restaurant the other side, there's another 4 or 5 restaurants further down that strip. So the resident, if I can call them that, are already surrounded by food outlets which have evening operations. The halfway house would probably be to say, well, we will grant you through till 8 o'clock and give you a little bit of a longer run. I take Councillor Nixon's point that in the winter these things don't apply because it's too cold and people are inside, but we have to we have to base our decision on the full 12 months, not a seasonal offering. I also take into account the difficulties the operator faces, and I understand that. And there are ongoing costs associated with extending your operational hours. So it would seem to be it's a good business operating through the daytime. It's very, very hard to implement policies in the operational side of the business that says you as a resident staying here can go outside and eat, But you as a non-resident just coming to dine, you can't. In practical terms, that's quite difficult to implement. So I do think that we need to be careful on putting that kind of proviso on.
But apparently that's what they're operating at the moment.
Till 6 o'clock.
Yeah. So they clearly have to say to anybody who's a non-resident at 6 o'clock, you can't eat outside.
Well, you can't eat at all.
Or you can eat out inside.
My understanding is a
Well,
non-resident can't.
this is where we need to clarify this, because, you know, are non-residents able to? Yeah. Let's go through this again.
Are we allowed to ask the speakers again, or is that not possible? The operator, could we not bring the operator
Let's go
back
to
up?
Andrew
I'm
first.
a little
Okay.
concerned about the time. Anyway, this application relates to the consumption, so the offering of food to non-residents. What residents of the site do, or of the premises do, is irrelevant. They can do anything at any time, anywhere. They are not controlled by this application. This application relates to where non-residents are able to dine, how many of them are able to dine, and when they are able to dine. And the proposal is simply to extend the hours into the evening for the non-resident diners internally and externally.
Thank
Good
you for the
understanding of that.
clarification.
I think
Chair.
that's perfectly straightforward.
It is, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad Councillor Evans has touched upon some of the context that I feel is missing from the paper, and that is the fact that you're on a very busy road full of bars. There's a very big pub with an outside drinking called the County. You've got Penny's has just opened, which is a Thai takeaway with doors open and people queuing down the street. You've got many other eateries along that road. And this might seem an indelicate comment, but the context is that I've moved into an area which is a tourist area, and I don't expect to have it all my own way. For example, if people park where I want to park, that's my lookout. And I just think that when you move into an area of mixed tenure, where you've got mixes of businesses and residential, you sort of have to expect some disturbance because that's how the world is. And you've got to respect the viability of businesses. And I think the second speaker made a good point there about the fact that, you know, he's got a business that he needs to survive. It is tough trading at the moment. And I don't think, looking at the conditions, that he's changing too much. There's 8 places, and you obviously have guests who can eat out anyway, and it's just being opened up for other people like ourselves who could go in there and have a meal if we so choose. So you know, I think you need to look at the area as a whole and take the context that there is a lot of noise disturbance all the time down that road. You only have to spend 10 minutes there in the evening to know that. And
Just say, I'm aware of people sort of gesturing, I can't, you know, I know it's frustrating. I've been in this position where I'm public gallery with a lot of people, and I know it's difficult and everything, but if I could just ask you just to, you know, just listen to the debate, and that's fine. I'm afraid I can't accept contributions from
sorry, and the other point I just make, there's no context as to the care home, because actually, if it's, for example, got an EMI unit in there, you're probably more likely to get complaints of noise disturbance about the care home than some of the actual outlets. And I work with the care sector, so I know that's a fact. So yeah, that bit of context is missing, but yeah, I'll conclude there. I think I've made the point really that it's a mixed area.
I've put Google Maps on the screen to try and illustrate the points that are being made there. So the premises is here. This is the care home. This is the first speaker's property. So we've got residential properties around here. We started here, so coming this way. Church Road does have commercial properties. They are perhaps a little distance away. Obviously, you've got the county that was referred to. You've got some other restaurants down here, but there is that separation distance, I think, between them, and there are a number of residential properties that are between those, perhaps the commercial hospitality hub that outside the county and this particular application site. I think it will. I'm not meaning to undermine your points there, Councillor, but I wanted to make sure that committee were able to witness. We talked about site visit in the last application, so that committee were able to have the facts as to where it is and what it is like around this particular building.
Vice Chair and then Councillor Collins.
Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chairman. There's 8 covers outside. This application isn't for an increase in the number of covers. It's still going to be the same number of covers, whether those seats are occupied by residents or non-residents. So there's not going to be any significant increase in noise on any one occasion, but there might be full number of 8 people dining outside more often. So if there isn't a problem with the noise level, there isn't going to be an increase in the noise level. So if the environmental protection team have said the noise level's fine, there isn't going to be an increase in the noise level, but the maximum that being experienced at the moment might happen more often. So I really don't think we can refuse this.
Are you going to put it forward?
I propose we approve it.
We have a proposer and a seconder. Did you indicate that you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to clarify whether this, if this was granted permission today, it would then go to licensing to extend the, for the extension, but also conditions would then be applied if necessary to basically take into account noise and light pollution. So it's not the end of the road in terms of...
Chairman, this would like to inform. Yes, presumably there will be an application for licensing content. If there were objections to that application, then there would be a hearing held before the licensing panel, which those objections would be fully ventilated, and the licensing panel would have the opportunity to impose conditions to deal with those concerns.
What I can say, I think we've had a protracted debate, but it was important actually that we got, clarification in terms of what is being proposed here, and also important that we heard potential impacts and weigh those up. That's what we have to do as a committee. We have to seek a balance between what is being requested and applied for and the impact in terms of the local community and neighbourhood amenity. Very difficult sometimes and very finely balanced, but we do have a proposer and a seconder, so all those in favour, please indicate. All those against? And it's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is one Matthew is that. That's item 3. Yeah. Just where here. It would be useful to finalise the item. Thank you.
So very briefly, if I can just, hopefully we can deal with item 2 relatively quickly. So this relates to...
Just point of order. I need to declare that I know the gentleman at this site only through the basis that he comes into the pub as a customer. I don't know him on a business basis. This is Piper's Height we're talking about
Yes.
here. Right? So, Chair, if you could direct, do I get involved in the
Ian,
conversation or not?
could I ask for advice on that, please?
Sounds to me like council would have a personal interest, which would be declaring that she has, but still take part in it.
And vote, yes. Okay.
Thank you.
That's
Thanks for that
fine. Thank you.
clarification.
Thank you for raising that.
Okay, Piper's Heights Caravan Park is quite a large caravan park at the top end of Peel Road, where Peel Road meets Preston New Road, Peel Corner. It's accessed off Peel Road. It's developed from humble beginnings as Tentonfield, I believe, in the 30s or wherever, and now is quite an extensive area of tours and statics. It's in the countryside. In 1994, planning permission was granted to use part of a building on site as a manager's flat. And this application is to revise that to remove the restriction to it being occupied by managers and allow it to be occupied independently of the business. Perhaps similar to an agricultural workers tie being lifted, albeit it's a one-bedroom flat in a building. The parish council were concerned about the limited level of information with the application, and so specifically requested that it came to committee for consideration. So obviously we've done that. So this is the majority of Piper's Heights. The building in question is here. Peel Corner's just off the top of the screen. This site is now largely occupied by statics that are mobile homes that are in private ownership. There is this part of the site now which serves as the touring site. And so you can see from this aerial images, some of the pictures are occupied, some aren't. So if you are using a touring caravan to visit the area, this is the part of the site that you generally use. So this is now the main access. This is now the main reception facility for those tourers. And the previous reception, social club, and such like buildings in this area are now not really used for that purpose, because the majority of people who use this access will be owners of caravans on the site, so they don't need to use it. So this is the building in question, one bedroom. It's a first floor flat in this part of. This is a two-storey building. This is a single-storey social club building, and this is the applicant's house. So it's a one-bedroom flat, as you can see, lounge, kitchen, bedroom. This is the building. So the flat in question is these four windows at first floor nearest to the camera. When this it's in the countryside. So new development for residential properties will be restricted, but you can convert buildings to other uses. When this building was approved for a manager's flat, there was perhaps a need for managers to be there to receive guests who arrive out of hours, to provide site security, to do all that kind of thing. That situation has perhaps changed in the 30 years since it was granted. There's the change in the operation of the site that I've described. There's the dwelling on site that now allows sort of a management presence to be there. And there's also CCTV, which provides a much more effective security measure than having a manager at the gate did or would do. And there are also some larger gates there now. So the position that officers have taken is that there is no longer a need for this building to be restricted to occupation by site managers. There's no longer a need for a manager to be on that site because of these arrangements. And that's not necessarily due to anything other than the evolution of the business and the evolution of technology. The scheme wipes its feet in terms of the amenity for occupiers, in terms of there's areas for parking on the site. And so the officer recommendation is that planning permission should be granted. I think this detail about the current operations is matters that have come to light following discussions between the applicant and the case officer that perhaps weren't available in the submission. And I think that's perhaps why the parish council had concerns of that nature. Clearly, they took a precautionary approach and requested committee consideration. So that's what we've done with it. But it's recommended for approval.
And usually, I'm just going to make a few points here in terms of the factors. I think we certainly need to consider that the main access to this site has changed from where the original site access was, where this particular building is. It's moved elsewhere. I've noted as well that the site owner lives on site, so there's still, for me, a responsible person there on site at all times who lives there, apart when he leaves the premises, obviously. CCTV, I note, from a security point of view, is there. Also, the argument about, accommodation being available as local accommodation for people who work there locally. And also, something I picked up in the report was that if you look at this, you could sort of say it's an opportunity whereby a small residential dwelling will become available in a rural area, which is, something that we do discuss from time to time. Well, as I was about to say earlier on, that was pertinent to our discussions then. So, and I think you might have said this, but GD4, there are exemptions to policy GD4 as well in terms of reuse of existing permanent buildings. I think that would apply in this case. So, what do people think?
Councillor Nixon first.
Councillor Nixon and then Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. Do we know, would it be permanently lived in by one person as like rented out to them, or will it be like, because it's a holiday environment, will it be as a holiday, or is that nothing to do with planning anyway?
It could be either. They've applied for it to be as a residential, as an independent, occupied independent. They're looking to remove the restriction for it to be a manager's flat. So that would allow them to use it as holiday accommodation.
Okay.
And the other, oh, that was loud, wasn't it? These properties, I believe, are used as holiday lets. So it may well be that they do use it as holiday lets, but they could use it for residential accommodation for, to rent it out.
I know the site and I've got absolutely no problem. Happy to propose this one to be granted.
Okay, we have a proposer, but I would like to go back to Councillor Griffiths, who asked to speak.
That is exactly how I feel, Councillor Nixon, so I'll second your proposal.
Yep.
If we don't have any other contributions, we've got a proposer and a seconder, so can we move to the vote? All those in favour? And it's unanimous. Thank you for that. That was item 2, and I think now we're moving on to item 3, where Matthew Taylor is here, so our officer. Right, so thank you, Matthew. This is item 3, land lease of Queensway, which is known now as Richmond Point. And Matthew will, we don't have any speakers, will make his detailed presentation.
Thank you, Chairman, and morning to members of the committee. I'm sure all our members will recognise this site as Richmond Point, land to the east of Queensway, and some of our members will recall another application that was dealt with on this part of the site, which is referred to as Parcel 4. This particular application relates to this area of the site here. This is a somewhat dated aerial photograph as all these trees have now been removed, but you can see that the early phases of Richmond Point are here as you enter the site from this temporary junction. Parcel 2 is much more advanced at this stage, and construction has also commenced on Parcel 4, which is in this area. You can also see here the nature park that's already been laid out, and the care home that's recently been constructed off Wildings Lane outside the boundaries of this site. So this application is to vary the condition that lists the approved plans, ecological mitigation documents, boundary treatments and soft landscaping of the latest reserve matters approval, which is this 2021 application. Referred to that. So just as a bit of background to the site's split into 8 separate development parcels. Originally, outline permission was granted in 2012 for up to 1,150 dwellings with a roundabout access off Queensway up in this corner. There's been several applications since then. So originally reserve matters approval and a separate full planning permission granted permission for a total of 948 dwellings across the site. That full application also included the introduction of this temporary priority junction here onto Queensway, and split the site into these 8 development parcels. So parcel 1 was originally constructed by Kensington, and they also constructed the opening part of parcel 2. Following on from that, Rowland Homes purchased the site in April 2021 and continued to construct Kensington's house types within parcel 2. Rowland also secured permission through the same application route as what this relates to, a Section 73 application, to substitute their own house types within Parcel 4, which included reducing the overall number from 948 to 898. Parcel 3 historically has been in separate third-party ownership, so Kensington didn't own this at the time of the application. Rowland Homes have now purchased this parcel off those third parties, and this application seeks to substitute their own house types into this parcel. Just to note that separate full planning permission has been granted to replace this roundabout with an interim signalised junction, which will allow access into the site via this route rather than the temporary route, which will be blocked up later in the process. At the moment, approximately 136 dwellings have been completed on the site, all within Parcel 1. Parcel 2's at an advanced stage, and construction has commenced within Parcel 4. So this is really a bit of background in terms of the process. So Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act relates to the determination of applications to develop land without compliance with conditions previously attached. And where this includes a condition listing the approved plans, that's referred to as a minor material amendment in the planning practice guidance, though that term doesn't appear in Section 73 of the Act itself. That's also been recently updated following case law, which states that there is no statutory limit on the degree of change permissible to conditions under Section 73, but the change must relate only to conditions and not to the operative part of the permission. So in that context, it's officers' view that the substitution of house types within Parcel 3, similarly to the conclusion we reached in Parcel 4, is eligible to be considered under the Section 73 application route. And the issuing of any new Section 73 permission effectively leaves 2 options for the developer, or multiple options, whereby they can either implement the original approval or any subsequent Section 73 approval. So you have a series of different approvals sitting alongside one another. So in this case, as I mentioned earlier, the application is to amend the approved plans condition to substitute Kensington's house types with Rowland's house types. As part of that, there's a 42 unit reduction in the number of dwellings within parcel 3. So that's falling from 105 down to 63, and other alterations to the reserve matters that were approved as part of earlier applications. So it's important to remember that there is an extant planning approval already on this site, and this application is to vary what's already been previously approved. The application also includes the introduction of an additional surface water pumping station. That's on the land that's reserved, between the land that's reserved for a school and a play area. I'll clarify the location and appearance of that later in the presentation. The variations to condition 30, that relates to a series of ecological mitigation documents that were approved as part of the original reserve matters. There's been bespoke construction environmental management plan and habitat regulations assessment prepared specifically for parcel 3 as part of this application. So the amendment to that condition simply seeks to add those additional documents to the list. And the changes to conditions 32 and 33 relate to details of boundary treatments and soft landscaping that have been provided up front with the application. So again, the change to that condition is simply to add those additional plans to that condition. So in terms of what's being considered as part of this Section 73 application, so it's to be assessed against the policies in the current development plan and framework. I'm sure Andrew may have mentioned to you this morning that the framework was updated yesterday, but there hasn't been any change that affects this particular application. It's very limited change to do with renewable energy, so that's unaffected as part of the consideration of this application. Again, the principle of development is established by the extant permissions, so we're really looking at this scheme in comparison to the fallback position that's already afforded by those extant permissions. So this is parcel 3, what this looks like at the moment. So the applicants carried out the surcharging works to raise the land levels. You can see parcel 1 in the background. So this is Salisbury Avenue. You've got a combination of 2-storey houses with side elevations onto the site, rear elevation here. These are garages, these lower level buildings. And then you've got some hip roofs to the bungalows that sit closer to that southern boundary. This is looking back towards TPO Woodland, which is known as Mellings Wood. So you've got Miller and Carter that you can see there through the gap in the woodland. Obviously, the trees aren't in leaf in this photo. So that's protected by TPO. This area is also protected by TPO. These are the backs of houses on Hay Houses Lane that back onto parcel 3. Again, just showing that TPO woodland to the backs of Hay Houses Lane. This is the view through to parcel 2, so Parkinson Boulevard is this road that runs along here, and these are the fronts of houses on parcel 2, fronting onto parcel 3. This is a drainage ditch, a swale, that presently continues up through parcel 2 and forms part of the drainage infrastructure for parcel 3. So this is looking across to parcel 4. These are the backs of houses on the croft and the TPO woodland beyond that that screens the Scout headquarters. So as part of this application, there's a connection to be formed through to Queensway. So this is the existing track that runs to the north of Hay Houses Lane. So you've got the TPO woodland on the north side, 3 Hay Houses Lane on the south side. So this is the existing opening onto Queensway, and this is the opening onto the site where it runs through. So this is what was approved on parcel 3 as part of Kensington's original application, the 2015 application. So there were a total of 105 dwellings on this site. You can see there's some larger buildings here. That's a 3-storey apartment block, another 2-storey apartment block, and quite a high density of terraced housing in particular along these frontages. So the mix, 33% 2-bed, 20% 3-bed, and 47% 4-bed across 12 house types, 28 apartments. I've included this colour-coded plan just because this shows the storey height. So 2-storey buildings are in blue, 2.5-storey in yellow, and 3-storey are in green. So there was quite a lot of taller house types within this particular parcel. And very high density, 50 dwellings per hectare, significantly above the 30 dwellings per hectare target in the local plan. This is the connection that was shown through to Queensway. This is where it merges with Hay Houses Lane. So this is a pedestrian link that's shown here, quite narrow in places and tight up against these buildings at the side. So this is what's now proposed in comparison. So you've got a much lower density development set within individual plots. The apartments have been deleted on this part of the site and replaced with larger detached houses. 18 house types across the site, 9% 2-bed, 43% 3-bed, so we're still within the 50% target in the local plan for those smaller units. 43% 4-bed, 5% 5-bed. With the exception of a single plot, all these houses are 2 stories in height, so the 3-storey buildings have been removed from the scheme. You can see it's a much lower density layout, more landscaping, in curtilage parking. Principally, there's some parking courtyards retained to these areas here, but a concept that's much more in line with what's happened on parcels 1 and 2 so far, and what's been approved on parcel 4. So the density is 30 dwellings a hectare, still in accordance with the target in the local plan. And this connection has been altered to give a much more open route. It's 2 metre wide pedestrian only route running through this open space here, greater standoff with the properties and less enclosed on the sides. These are just some house type comparison drawings on the equivalent plots. So I've included this here, particularly because this is the plot that fronts onto the pedestrian link. So you'll have this, these are the elevations that were approved. So these were Kensington's house types, and these are Rowland's house types on the equivalent plots. So this is the facade that would overlook the pedestrian link. And this is the side elevation of the same house type that faces onto the road. So you can see there's a lot more interest and activity in this elevation in comparison to Kensington's. Much better natural surveillance of that pedestrian route. These were the 3-storey terraced house types that have been replaced by quite similar house types in terms of the composition here, but obviously removing that top storey. Similarly, example of the detached house type where the roof's been broken up more with this hip. A lot of symmetry to the elevations, which is a theme that runs across the house types. In terms of the surface water pumping station that I mentioned earlier, so this is, we're moving outside parcel 3 now, so this is the land north of parcel 5. This is the site that's reserved for a school. This is the play area, and this is the layout of the pumping station. So you can see there's quite a deep landscape strip around the side and rear of the pumping station, and onto the other side with these areas left for access and easements. So just to give you an example of what the pumping station would look like, this is one that's completed on Salisbury Avenue, so on phase 1 of the development. You can see the only above ground apparatus is this equipment cabinet here. There's this 2 metre high weld mesh fence around the boundary, and then this planting that exceeds the height of that fence to screen it from the roadside. So this is quite an exposed location with at present open land on all sides. Obviously the play area and school would be introduced in the future, but for the time being it's very exposed. So this is the reason for this landscaping around the fringes. But all this other equipment, this is a bay for vehicles to access, so a hard standing strip through these gates. This is all below ground, kind of large manholes and this is the equipment cabinet that you can see here in the example for the earlier phase. So in terms of the implications, this application, housing land supply, the site was originally allocated for 992 dwellings in the local plan, albeit that the permissions only granted 948. That was reduced by the last Section 73 application within Parcel 4, so 50 dwellings were removed from that as part of that application, and this application removes a further 42. So it's 136 dwellings less than the local plan allocation. However, as members will be aware, the partial review of the filed local plan reduced the minimum housing requirement across the plan period by a total of 1,440 dwellings. So we've got this headroom effectively where you won't need to allocate any new sites, despite the fact that there's a reduction in the overall number on Queensway. So there's no prejudicial impact on either our long-term housing land supply because of this headroom, and no impact on the immediate 5-year position, as Queensway will extend much longer beyond this period. So that's more about the rate of delivery, and the annual housing target is the overall number across the plan period. So the original application was environmental impact assessment development, and so this Section 73 also falls in that category. So there's been an updated environmental statement submitted with the application and a habitat regulations assessment. Both of those focus on the changes that are proposed within Parcel 3, but this slide just shows the original approval of the nature park. So this tree planting here on the fringes to offset the losses elsewhere on the site, and this area is the farmland conservation area that's to mitigate the impact on functionally linked land to the Ribble and Alt estuaries. Because there's a reduction in the number of dwellings and this mitigation has already been put in place, the HRA and environmental statement conclude that there's no additional impact arising from this scheme that needs any further mitigation. That's accepted by Natural England. So in terms of amenity, these spacing distances, if you recall from the previous slide that showed the storey heights, there were some quite close relationships, 3-storey buildings being put on the boundaries, sometimes with these bungalows in Parcel 1. So those relationships are improved in this scheme by both increasing the spacing distances and also reducing the height of the buildings to 2 storeys. So all of these spacing distances are greater than the previous scheme. Shown the distances here with Parcel 4, so 12.5 metres back to side and 21.5 metres back to back, and then a substantial space in 54 metres with the closest properties on Hay Houses Lane. So the impact is very much more on the existing dwellings within Richmond Point than any outside, but all these spacing distances exceed our normal standards in the supplementary planning document. In terms of tree works, there's a single ash tree within this group that needs to be removed because of some structural defects, and there's branches overhanging these gardens that need to be pruned back. Those tree works were also approved as part of the arboricultural method statement for the extant reserve matters, so there's no change to the nature of tree works proposed. Members will note in the resolution, so stipulation 3 of the resolution requests that members delegate authority to officers to resolve some outstanding issues with the highway design that have been raised by the County Council. I've summarised the 4 main issues here. So the first talks about basically the positions of tree planting in between driveways and alongside the estate road to ensure that they don't obstruct visibility displays when the trees mature in the future. So that'll be a combination of repositioning some trees and or looking at the species to make sure that the canopies don't impede those visibility displays. LCC have requested that the pedestrian link through to Queensway is increased from 2 metres in width to 3.5 metres in width, with the intention that that would provide a shared pedestrian and cycle connection. rather than a pedestrian-only link. There are then some technical changes to the actual road design, including the introduction of tactile paving, refuse vehicle tracking for turning heads. I'll go back to the previous slide to explain this connection here. So LCC have queried whether this shared drive will connect through to the estate road at this point, and if so, a crossing is needed here, or drop crossing. Alternatively, that shared drive would cut off here, and that would just become green space to prevent access through to that road. So that's a point of clarification they've requested. They've also requested barriers to be put up alongside this shared drive here, because this is a drainage ditch. So they're trying to safeguard against any potential for vehicles to basically have an accident and enter the ditch here by putting up some barriers along this side of the road. And the final thing is the radius of this junction. So effectively, they're looking for that radius to be smoothed along there, the angle of that. So really, these are all very specific and quite minor alterations that won't have any materially different impacts on the scheme that's been presented to members today. So part of the resolution is for members to delegate authority to officers to go back to LCC and the developer, enter into discussions with them to come to a resolution on these four summarised matters here. So that would involve officers receiving amended plans, getting LCC Highways updated comments on those plans that they're happy with those changes, and then subsequently issuing the decision. But there wouldn't be any fundamental change to the layout of the scheme to include those. So just summarising the main points. So the site's allocated in the local plan. It's got extant reserve matters approvals that give the fallback position for the development. So this section 73 application is in the context of those fallback positions. So we're looking at substitutions and changes rather than introducing anything new or different within that site. The principles established and the merits of this application focus on the nature of the changes that are being proposed. So one of the aspects of this is the reduction in the number of dwellings that would be delivered across the Richmond Point site. So that would be down from 898 to 856. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we've got this headroom of 1,440 dwellings. So a reduction of 136 against the local plan target doesn't have any prejudicial impact on our housing land supply in either the short or long-term periods. What we do have is a design that in officers' view is preferable to the previous Parcel 3 layout. So a much less intense form of development, house types that are lower in the storey height and more compatible with the density and character of development that's around it. Increased landscaping, better configuration of parking spaces, and an overall improvement in building elevations, frontages, how they front onto the road, and particularly that pedestrian access and how the buildings address that to make that as attractive as possible for future occupiers. The surface water pumping station, which also forms part of the scheme, it's extensively screened by that perimeter landscaping, and in accordance with the example I showed you earlier on Salisbury Avenue, it's quite a modest installation. So the main issue is making sure that that screening is effective around its perimeter. All that works to TPO trees limited to the removal of that single specimen and pruning back of some of the overhanging branches as already established by the extant reserve matters. Improved spacing distances and building relationships with existing dwellings to deliver better amenity standards in comparison to the approved scheme. So just running through the stipulations in the resolution. So there's 4 of those. So it's to delegate authority to officers or to the head of planning to grant planning permission subject to modifications to the planning obligation. So some of the dwelling number triggers need to be amended. There's a single instance of that, so it's quite limited. But to account for the 42 unit reduction in the number of dwellings within parcel 3 and the reduced total of 856. There needs to be some changes to the trigger in the planning obligation to allow for that. The habitat regulations assessment and Kemp for parcel 3 are to be added to the list of ecological mitigation documents as part of the change to condition 30, and the stipulation 2 in the resolution is for the council to formally adopt that habitat regulations assessment as part of its decision. Stipulation 3 relates to the highway works and addressing those outstanding highway design issues with LCC through minor amendments to the current plans. And the final stipulation sets out the conditions that are to be imposed as part of the application. A lot of the changes are simply updating drawing references from the previous approval and to refer to the updated plans. But just a note here that additional conditions can't be imposed as part of this application that couldn't have been imposed on the original planning permission. That's particularly got implications for policy H2 that relates to dwelling sizes, although those are met in this case in terms of the 50% 1 to 3 bed, but specialist accommodation for the elderly can't be introduced through this section 73 application as the process doesn't allow those types of conditions to be imposed which couldn't have been on the original planning permission. So the application is recommended for approval on that basis.
Thank you, Matthew, for that very detailed presentation, very helpful. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent presentation. I'm happy to propose this application on the basis that on every level it would appear to be an improvement on what had gone before. I think taking into account increasing car sizes and increasing spaces on that basis, improving landscaping, reducing density of properties across the board while still maintaining diversity of property sizes. I think this is a good development and we should get behind it, so I'm happy to propose. Thanks, Chair.
Do you have a seconder? But I am going to bring other people in. Right, Councillor Settle, you were coming in anyway, weren't you? So I'll let you come in and then I'll go to Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to second this. As the officer said, much improved proposal, less dense, and particularly keen on removing the 3-storey block, which I don't think was in keeping with this parcel of land. And a pumping station. Any pumping station in that area is welcome. The more the merrier. So, well done for that one. Thank you.
One of the questions I asked about the pumping station, it was welcome as far as I was concerned with the drainage challenges we appear to have in Fylde at times, was that the answer was no, it wouldn't compromise the site for the new school. You know, there's plenty of land there, etc. You know, to be able to deliver that one, because obviously that's where it is. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. I thoroughly agree with Councillor Evans and Councillor Settle. Basically, why can't all developers be a bit more enlightened about density and whatever? I applaud this. Thank you.
And I endorse the comments that have been made so far. When I read the report and I discussed it with officers, etc., one of the things that you look at with a scheme here is, well, how does it compare with the Kensington scheme that was there before? And we've all mentioned things like landscaping, more open space, you know, greater spaces between houses, etc., fewer dwellings. Still a reasonable density in terms of, you know, 30 per hectare, I think it is. But so delivering that. But also I noticed, you know, although the 2 beds have gone down, the 3 beds are up and the 4 beds are there. I think there are 5 bedrooms, just a few of those. But as you mentioned, Councillor Settle, that the big change as well on top of that was the reduction of height. We had a lot of apartments in there before. And we also had more 2.5-storey buildings. We've only got 1 now, I think, in the development. And I think that is much more in keeping, I think, with that particular part of the world and with the character of that area. So I think, you know, obviously that this particular application, I think should be welcomed and is a positive move forward. We have a proposer, and
I just
yeah,
add a
you
word
can
before-
now that you're asking. Of course you can.
Many
Yes.
thanks. Jen. I think yes, I'd agree with other contributions. This is a positive step. It looks like a very good quality development. We're delegating authority to the officers
Yes,
to
yes.
finalise these specific points about highways. There are various other points on pages 62 in your agenda that will be considered. The other thing I'm saying, it's not specific to this, but as a general consideration going forward, we talk a lot about 4 and 5 bedroom properties. In the modern lifestyle, they're not necessarily properties that are going to be bought by people with large families, particularly in the aftermath of COVID. A lot of people are looking for office space at home. It's not uncommon for a couple with one small child to have a 4-bedroom property, or even to want to upgrade from that to a 5. So they've got 2 fully functioning offices and a nursery and maybe 2 operational bedrooms. So I think that's just a general point worth considering in looking at sizes of properties going forward. But yeah, other than that, I'd echo the comments. I'd be more than happy to support the proposal, the recommendation.
So we've got a proposer with Councillor Evans. We've got a seconder, I think, haven't we, with Councillor Settle. So can we go to the vote? All those in favour?
So unanimous.
That's unanimous. Thank you. I think we go to item 6, I think. 4 and 6. Is it 4 and 6? I think we'll carry on.
Carry on.
Okay.
Not seen many people shooting too uncomfortable there.
I do not.
Changing the seats. Original chair, that's all.
Oh, I'll go now then.
Oh. The biscuits are out, the biscuits are there, but the beverages are rationed. You know, drink the hand sanitizer.
Refreshing water.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's enabled members to have an informal quick break. Just waiting for the ones that are there.
Yeah, I think it must be pit stop.
I'll put the aircon on.
It's quite warm in here.
I think the jacket's
Is the battery not working?
Just need to turn it off.
I'll put this curtain as well.
Yes.
Yep, are we all comfortable to start now? Okay. Thank you.
Shall I progress?
So this is item 4. I'm going to hand over now to our officer, Rob Buffon. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. So yeah, the next item on the agenda is number 4, which is 23/0125. That relates to land to the east of Peel Road, Westby with Plumptons. The application seeks consent for construction of a battery electricity storage system. I'll refer to that as BESS from now on. I think it's a bit of a mouthful to keep repeating those words, but that development includes storage battery cabinets, transformer unit, control room, switch room, welfare offices, substation, CCTVs, security fencing, access and landscaping. The application site is as per the red edge on both images. So I've put a wider context aerial in just to demonstrate where the application site is in 2 buildings that we might all know. So this is the M55 junction. This is Preston New Road, which runs off towards Kirkham. We've got B&Q here, and we've got the car sales and dealership places on White Hills here. For those who know Peel Road, there's quite a large scale substation, which is sited here, which is immediately northwest of the application site, which can be seen in greater detail on the image on the right hand side. The application site is located within a countryside area and is designated as such in the Fire Local Plan Proposals Map. Just by way of background, the National Grid, they have a statutory duty to ensure the supply of electricity within the UK. There are peaks in electricity demand, which are a long-standing challenge for the National Grid, traditionally occurring in the evening. However, these daily peaks are becoming difficult to predict and manage due to increased demands from the public, industry, and also changes to working practices as a result of COVID. The BESS facility acts to draw down electricity from the National Grid at times when there's excess generation. That then is stored in an off-grid location until such a time that it's required by the National Grid. This provides an immediate response when needed by the National Grid and allowing an instant release of electricity into the network. BESS therefore provides certainty that in times of a surge in electricity demand, there'll always be power reserves available, helping to avoid blackouts and helping the National Grid meet their statutory duty. Just some existing photos for you here. Top left, that's facing south on the application site. This hedgerow that you see is adjacent to Peel Road. The bottom image on the left hand side, that's facing in a north direction towards the White Hills Industrial Estate and motorway corridor. Image to the bottom right hand, that's facing east, obviously depicting the site as agricultural land at the moment. Land levels wise, the land levels fall in an easterly direction away from Peel Road. At its greatest point, the land levels are about 2.5 metres set below the level of Peel Road. Just some external vantage point photos. The site really isn't prominent in vantage points. There's no public right-of-ways or footpaths that run along Peel Road. You can see in the left-hand image that there's a substantial mature hedgerow that runs along Peel Road as well, which in combination with the land level differences act as a natural kind of screen to the development, especially when approaching from the northern aspect of Peel Road. When approaching from the southern aspect of Peel Road, when approaching from the north, the land level kind of drops when you go past the caravan site. That allows kind of extended views through the valley and over that landscaped area. That can be seen really. I've tried to demonstrate approximately where the application site is for you by that red star. But you can see the pylons obviously in the foreground, the pylon line running away from the application site in an easterly direction. And then obviously the open agricultural land that runs and forms predominant character really of that area of the development. So surrounding character again, say the site itself is agricultural. It forms part of a much larger agricultural farm holding. The image in the top right hand corner, the blue line kind of attempts to demonstrate the extent of built form that surrounds the site. So that parcel to the north is formed by the substation and quite a large scale caravan park known as Piper's Height. And then to the south of the site, we've got some farm buildings. But noticeably, the application site is located in between these two developed areas. There's a slither of open space at which connects to countryside and opens out into much wider countryside areas to the east and west of the application site. Like I said before, there's no public rights of way within the site or within the surrounding fields to the site. There's no footways to Peel Road either. So the main visual receptor, primarily from vehicles that use Peel Road. So moving on to the development, the left-hand image provides you with a snapshot of the proposed site layout. It's 0.62 hectares in size. It consists of a compound area, which is defined by the rectangular shape in the middle. That's 71 metres by 39 metres and is surrounded by landscaping. The compound area contains the built form, which is surrounded by a 1 metre high grass bund and a 2.4 metre high mesh fence. The vehicular access takes advantage of an existing field arrangement that's presently used by the farmer. That will be improved though to improve the visibility sight lines, and that will result in a removal of approximately 2 metres of hedgerow, which is 1 metre either side of that access arrangement. That access will be used for construction of the development, but also for maintenance once it's operational, and also as access for the agricultural vehicles that want to obviously maintain the farm holding. There will be a connection between the development and the substation located to the northwest of the development, and that will be provided by statutory bodies under their own permitted development rights. Landscaping wise, provision is to maintain the hedgerow that runs along Peel Road. That will be maintained at a minimum height of 3 metres. The reason for that primarily is to make sure that that is a mature, obviously acts as an immediate kind of screening impact to the development, but also it's maintained at height so farmers can't come along and chop it down to 1 metre and then obviously increase provenance of that development. Landscaping also includes a hedgerow perimeter around the compound area, tree planting, as well as infill hedge planting and tree planting where there's gaps along that existing hedgerow
to Peel Road. There aren't any tree planting proposed along this eastern elevation, albeit there's 3 here. The reason for that is because of the proximity to the pylon line. Obviously, we can't have trees which grow into the overhead lines for health and safety reasons. The development seeks consent on a 40-year temporary basis, after which all the above and below ground features and structures will be removed and the land reinstated. With regards to the built form that's proposed, the main element of the scheme relates to the battery cabinets, power converters and the transformers which are in this area of the site here. That's just a snapshot of the elevation and floor planned drawings of those elements. The important thing to note though is that the height overall is 3.4 metres. This just again gives you a snapshot really of the other structures that are being proposed. We have a switch room, substation and control room. They're all coloured dark green, as is the mesh fence that surrounds the perimeter of the compound. I should just mention, flip back to this, that the actual colour of these battery cabinets is as is shown on those drawings, coloured grey or off-white. Planning history forms quite an important element in the assessment of this planning application. This dates back probably 6 years ago when I was first at the council, and there was an application on this application site for a gas-powered electricity generator and battery storage facility. So basically that development generated the electricity on site through the gas-powered generators, but then stored it on site as well in the batteries. It's similar to this scheme, but slightly different in the sense that the electricity isn't generated by this scheme by the gas powered. It's drawn down primarily from the national grid. But the ethos is still the same in the sense that it's fundamentally an electricity storage that helps, prolongs, however you want to call it, the national grid and the statutory obligations that they need to require. So the scheme itself was very similar. There were, again, differences. The layout that was submitted in the 2000 scheme is on the left-hand side. Obviously, the current scheme is on the right-hand side. You can see that the main element of the gas-powered generators takes up a large proportion of the application site. Those gas-powered generators were 4.7 metres in height. It still had a substation, welfare, and those kind of things which are included with our scheme, within the current scheme. The differences being, though, obviously, that the main structures, which are of they take up a smaller area of the compound and are also of a smaller height, being only 3.4 metres. They also don't extend as far east into the countryside as what the other gas-powered generated development did. As you can see, the gas-powered structures here extend right the way up to this boundary along here, whereas here it's certainly softer in the sense that the structures are located more to the western area of that compound. The gas-powered application in 2017 was refused by officers. Main and single reason was impact on the rural area, the countryside, diminishing openness, visual amenity, affecting the site's rural character and setting within the countryside area. Notwithstanding that refusal by the council, it was appealed by the applicant at the time, with the inspector concluding that the principle of development was acceptable in accordance with policy GD4D, which essentially meant that it was needed for the continuation of an existing enterprise. So that is recognising a link between the storage capacity, the electricity storage capacity of the development and the supportive nature that it would do and serve for the national grid. So if you recall at the beginning of the presentation, we mentioned how the national grid need to manage the amount of electricity in the network. Those peaks and pressures on the national grid are becoming more severe. what this development does is allow a release of electricity into the national grid to try and cope with those peaks, so as to reduce the probability of blackout occurring. So the appeal in the end was upheld, meaning basically that the planning inspector supported the principle of development, but also on the basis that the scheme in terms of landscape impact was mitigated by the landscape proposals that were proposed at that time. That appeal is material in the assessment of this plan application, forms a strong fallback position in support of the proposal. So, main issues, I've summarised it principally on the principle of development and landscape and visual impact. As I mentioned, the site is located within the countryside, so policy GD4 is of relevance. That supports certain amounts of development subject to criteria A and G, which are on the presentation in front of us. The inspector at the time of the appeal considered those same criteria. He also considered the fact that this proposal is very similar in substance, if you would call that, to the gas-powered facility that was previously appealed. Inspector considered the principle of development, again concluding that it wasn't compliant with criteria A, B, C, E, F or G, but was in accordance with criteria D, which relates to development essentially needed for the continuation of an existing enterprise, and that existing enterprise is seen to be the national grid connection. The inspector also supported that development based upon the fact that the development proposed was physically linked to the substation, and also obviously was therefore physically linked to the national grid network, on grounds that it would make a valuable contribution to the network, providing a real-time electricity and capacity which can be drawn upon so that there is always a secure supply. Now, as I mentioned previously, the principle of development, my report is based fundamentally on the appeal assessment by the inspector, and that is based primarily on the fact that the two developments are similar in design, similar in what they will achieve for the national grid. So on that basis, bearing in mind the appeal decision, the conclusion is that the principle of development is acceptable because it's compliant with criteria D of GD4 and consistent with the appeal decision that the inspector has made. The remaining issue is landscape and visual impact. So policy GD4 criteria D also requires an assessment to the character and harm of the surrounding countryside. That is duplicated within NPPF, so there is both national and local plan policy requirement for us to consider what the harm to the countryside character this development would potentially bring. That existing character is formed by the farmland, which is punctured to the east and west of the site. There are also built form very close to the development, so we have the substation, the large scale substation to the northwest, we have the caravan park, we also have the built form of farm buildings which are located to the south. The site isn't immediately adjacent to Peel Road. It has a setback behind the existing hedgerow. There aren't any public rights of way in that area. There's no public footpath that runs along Peel Road. So the visibility of the development is formed primarily from road users, so people who use that route from within vehicles themselves. That could be the drivers, could be passengers. The proposed compound area is set to a lower level. It's landscaped, which in combination will act to soften, almost obscure the development once matured. The hedgerow will be retained at a height of 3 metres, which again will help when the development is viewed from those transient receptors from Peel Road. Development is temporary in nature. 40 years is a long time, but still nonetheless is seen to be temporary, which means that those landscape and visual impacts which will be apparent are reversible because the structures in time should be removed. That's not to stop the applicant or any future landowner applying for an extension of that 40 years in times to come though. The height of the structures, the main structures, is 3.4 metres compared to the 4.7 metres of the previous scheme that's been determined to be acceptable. The site is less intensively developed and also affords an enhanced landscaping scheme. And in that respect, when we compare the two schemes, so the appeal scheme and this current scheme, we'd say that this current scheme provided a betterment when compared to the previous scheme. Notwithstanding that though, it is still office opinion that the previous report concerns for landscape impact are still valid to the current proposal. It has to, I mean the site's open at the moment, you're introducing built form into there, so there would be a landscape impact. Notwithstanding that though, as I keep referring to, the previous appeal considered that matter. The planning inspector, subject to the proposed landscaping in that scheme, supported the development and the countryside impact. That decision falls a very strong fallback position, both in terms of principle, both in terms of landscape impact. And whilst as officers we have concerns for landscape character, that appeal decision will outweigh what impact potentially the development could have. On the landscape impact, I mentioned the colouring of structures. So countryside location, you would normally expect any structures within there to reflect that countryside, that natural kind of location. So we have agricultural buildings which are predominantly timber, they're of a muted colour. The majority of structures that are proposed are of an olive green, which are a dark green, which blend in better than what a grey stroke off-white kind of structure would do. So we're proposing to condition that individual structure is also olive green as well, just to get some kind of harmony with that surrounding countryside character. There aren't any other technical issues, including highways amenity, flood risk or drainage. So the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Rob. Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we should support the proposal. Anything that helps the continuity of supply of National Grid must be something that we have to support. It seems to be in an ideal location next to a substation. You couldn't put this in an urban environment, so it has to be somewhere in the countryside. It's near farm buildings, so it's not in open countryside. It's well shielded with the landscaping, so I can't see any problem with it myself. As I say, I think there'll be more applications of this nature, whether in Fylde or the rest of the country, to help the National Grid supply, which has got an increasing demand. So, as I say, I support it and I will propose it.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you. The parish council have objected and said, why could it not be on the opposite side of the road, which is directly next to the substation that's already in place? Why can't it be?
I can't answer that question. I can't answer that question in the sense that obviously we have to determine the plan application that's in front of us, so the location that's in front of us. The applicant doesn't have to demonstrate why they may have discounted other sites and why they've selected this site. So we can just consider what's in front of us. Now, bearing in mind the development that's proposed, the betterment of that development in comparison to the previous scheme, which has been determined to be acceptable through the planning inspectorate, and I think that's as far really as from an office perspective at least that we can take the assessment.
Okay, just does seem it would be in a better location next door to the already existing substation, and rather than in the middle of a field across the road. Is there any noise associated with this?
No.
Right, thank you.
And notwithstanding that, though, I shall, if I just flick, just to give you a little bit more comfort. So the nearest of houses, there's a house here, which is, I would say, at least a couple of 100 metres away from the development. There's a farm
Ridgeway
holding
Farm,
here.
that's lived in, somebody lives there.
Yeah. Then obviously there's a farm holding here, but again, I think with the ambient noise levels formed by the high use of Peel Road, then I don't think noise would be an issue in any event.
Right. Is there any possibility this could go the same way as the other one and just not get built? I mean, the other one just didn't get built, did it? So
Quite possibly, at the end of the day, if this application gets approved, then they'll have 3 years to commence development and have conditions discharged. If they don't do that within that time, then the application, the approval falls away, so they would then have to reapply.
yeah, okay, thank you. Oh, sorry,
We have a proposer. Do we have a seconder? Oh, you're going to second, okay. So, and Councillor Evans, please come in.
Yeah, I'm minded to back this proposal as well. The only one point I would raise is that, you know, at the 3.4 metre high, that's about a single storey height. And I think you alluded to the fact that the hedgerow down the side of it will be 3 metres high, which would obviously leave a certain amount sticking over the top. So if it was possible to bring the two in line with each other, that would seem to be sensible.
Just to come back on that, the land levels are slightly lower on the development side. So I would anticipate that the hedgerow being maintained at 3 metres would act as a very good screen. Yeah. There are some gaps in that hedgerow, but the applicant is proposing to infill those gaps. So that will take time to mature, but once mature, there should be a good close-up screen for the development.
It's liable to get lower rather than higher, presumably, as well over time. And then the other concern, which I imagine would be a health and safety or anything else, is fire with battery cells and storing that kind of thing. So presumably accessibility from emergency services on that basis would be the same as the substation on the side of the road.
Yeah, the fire service have provided us with some comments. They didn't object to the scheme. But yeah, they've suggested, I can't remember the wording, but some kind of fire procedure, so a protocol that the applicant would follow in the event of a fire. They saw that the planning system as a means to achieve and get that document from the applicant, but unfortunately it goes beyond what we would consider we could actually require the applicant to do. The only comparison it could probably give you is a similar situation for a house and what that homeowner would do in the event of a fire. The planning system certainly doesn't look after, babysit that kind of procedure. So it's left to other legislation, but there is legislation within the Fire Safety Act to require the applicant to come to some kind of agreement with the fire service about fire risk.
And it is far enough away from any other development, so...
It is. I mean, you can see from the areas in front of you, there's no risk of spread to other buildings per se. And the nearest ones are obviously on the opposite side of the road, which there could be a fire risk, but then obviously looking at the uses surrounding the piling line and the substation, equally there's fire risk from those as well. So,
right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We've got a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour?
Unanimous.
Unanimous.
So good afternoon, Chairman and the members of the planning committee. So I'm going to present on a full planning application at Kirkham Community Centre for the extension and alteration of the building. So the reason for decision level, so this applicant is the file counsel, so it is necessary to bring the case to the committee for decision. So let's start from the location of the site. So on the right-hand side of the slide, the red boundary is the application boundary, which is the Kirkham Community Centre. And the community centre can be accessed from Polton Street, so on the orange arrows. And to explain the context, so the site is on the eastern side of the Morrison supermarket, and the car park is at the front of the community centre. The application proposal consists of 4 components, and I'm going to explain these components one by one. The first component is the front extension of the community centre to form a new toilet with shower room and the associated entrance. So this new toilet is what we call changing place toilet or changing place facility. So to explain further, changing place facility is an enhanced version of the traditional accessible toilet. So it is larger in size, so which allows the needy and the carers or the caretakers to be use the facility at the same time. And it got changing places for them, an adult size changing bed, and then the accessible toilet can be accessed from both sides. So this size can fit into the larger wheelchairs. So this is the existing and proposed layout. And the second item is the formation of a new double door entrance from the window. So this elevation on the right hand side shows item 1 is the extended changing place facility, and the second is the new double door entrance. Item 3 is a result of item 1 and 2 because we have to make space for the new front extension and the new drop the curb for the new double door entrance. So the length of the soft landscape will be slightly reduced, so as shown on the drawings. Item 4 is for blocking up the existing door to the southern elevation. So the photo on the left hand side is taken from Burley Street. The exit is around 2 meters above the street level. So after blocking up the exit door, a new storeroom will be formed. For the assessment, so I will start from the appearance. For the front elevation, the expected impact is very limited because the scale of development is small, and the extended part is expected to be blended into the soft landscape of the front elevation. And for the side elevation, because of the blocking up of the exit door, with use of matching materials, it is expected that the change will not be easily noticeable, and given its height from the street level, the change can't be seen easily. And for character, because of the site itself, the associated front car park and the community centre is surrounded by soft landscape, so the front extension will not be easily seen from public road. So I believe the character, the impact on character will be very limited. And assessment is also on the parking and access. So as a result of the 4 components or the item 1 to 3 of the development, there will be net loss of 1 parking space. There are 2 reasons. The first reason is that the existing disability spaces as shown on the top right hand corner is not up to current standard. So reprovision is required such that an accessible access zone, as shown on the bottom right hand corner, is shown to allow a more wider access to the space. And the second reason is that the new facility, as discussed just now, the new double door entrance required to drop the curb, so you have to provide space for that. And the consequence is that despite the net loss of 1 space, I still believe the community centre can still have sufficient parking space based on the assessment of the parking standard and the location itself. So the recommendation is that this application itself is supported by the Town Council, and is recommended for approval with 3 associated conditions to specify the time limit, the compliance with the submitted drawings, and the building materials. And I'm ready for questions.
Before we have any questions, I'll just point out, obviously, as Kenneth said, and by the way, this is Kenneth's first presentation as a planning officer at Fylde Council, so I think we'd like to congratulate him and welcome him to Fylde Council and hope that he's very happy here. So you're very welcome. And also say this is a Fylde Council project and it also receives the full support of Kirkham Town Council. So, you know, it's a development which has been welcomed by the Town Council. Councillor Settle.
I propose acceptance of it. It's an improvement to the building. There's a loss of 1 parking space, but I use that building on Friday afternoons regularly, and there's absolutely lots of parking space up there. So losing 1 is nothing really. As I say, it's an improvement to the building. So I propose acceptance.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Can we go to the vote? All those in favour? That's unanimous again.
I'll canter through this if this is okay, but please do stop me if you want questions on it. There's a proposal to form 3 wind farms out in the 20 miles over there, generally. Morgan and Morecambe are due to bring their power ashore to St Anne's, to Blackpool. The Mona field is proposed to go to North Wales. So there's 4 projects, the 3 wind farms, and then what they call the transmission assets, which is the cabling and the electricity transmission works that go alongside the cabling. These are all going to be nationally significant infrastructure projects, NSIPs. So that means that the Secretary of State determines the applications rather than Fylde Council, Lancashire County Council, or anything like that. It's the Secretary of State. They're expecting to submit the application next year and then determine it the year after, and then potentially construction commencing 5 years down the line. We're at the current stage where public consultation is taking place. Some has taken place, some more is to come. This report is to get authority. Well, the head of planning has authority to comment on these matters for the council. This report is to inform you about it and then secure some volunteers for a sort of an informal group to assist the head of planning in putting those views together. So just a little bit more about what they are. So these are some images that have been provided from their public consultation network. So you've got a lot of stuff going on out to sea, platforms, substations, a cable that comes in underground, and then there will be some onshore substations, and they are then connected to the national grid at Penwortham near Preston, where there is quite a collection of electricity facilities. Looking at a slightly different image of the same sort of thing. So that's showing that you've got the wind turbines connecting to rigs, for want of a better description, cables, substations connecting to the grid. There's going to be quite a number of cables routed together, and they are looking at a construction corridor of up to 120 metres in width. The reason for that is to provide for the cable trenches, but also to look at what a whole road, contractors, compound, welfare facilities, site storage facilities, all the sort of stuff that they will need to support that. Clearly, that's a very significant area. When I show you the next slide where it goes, you'll appreciate that further. They're also talking about having onshore substations, which they're talking about being 2,800 square metres of floor area, which is massive. 280,000 square metres and up to 25 metres tall, which is about a 10-storey building. So the building over the road's 7 stories. The routing, so it's due to come ashore over there, just off North Beach, round Blackpool Airport, and then this is their current search area. So they're looking to bring it up round the top of Lytham and St Anne's, south of Ray Green, through Wharton near the Burley Arms, over the top of Freckleton, between Freckleton and Kirkham and the prison, bypassing Newton, and then coming into across the river somewhere near Clifton Marsh, and then connecting into Penwortham here. They're currently trying to contact landowners and look at land ownership acquisitions or coming to lease agreements with landowners. They're also, the people behind it are incredibly well resourced and are doing all sorts of surveys about shipping, marine life, impact on wildlife on the beach, heritage, impact on transport networks. The railway line has to be crossed, Ligard Brook has to be crossed, the new Hay Houses Link Road might have to be crossed. There's all sorts of infrastructure that they need to look at as part of this routing. So it is going to be something that's going to ramp up and be, be quite a considerable issue for Filesborough in the coming months and years onwards. So that's why we wanted to sort of inform members today about it and get your input into Mark's guidance or views that he's putting forward on behalf of the council into this planning process initially, and no doubt there'll be further stages as and when it progresses further. I don't know why I put that in. So basically that's where we are. There's 3 recommendations in the report. There's 2 on the agenda papers and 1 on the late observations. So they are to note the report, to nominate, it says up to 4 representatives to support the head of planning in his delegated powers. And then there's a further recommendation that's been added through the late observations, which is to invite the proposers of the scheme to offer a briefing to members. I know a little bit about it, but I'm not really well versed to be able to answer questions other than reading out what it says on their website. Whereas it really should be something that I think the community should be able to interact with them directly to express views. So that's the 3rd recommendation.
Right. I just want to mention that as far as recommendation 2 is concerned, I've been approached by 4 members already. That's Councillor Collins and Councillor Griffiths and Councillor Harrison and Councillor Settle in terms of wanting to get involved in this. Can you confirm that's correct? That's correct. For everybody, so that you know. Councillor Griffiths, I mean, what I wanted to say is I don't want a detailed debate about this now. That's not the purpose. We're going to get a proper presentation for you, but it was to highlight this is a big project. It won't happen immediately anytime soon, but it is a major project and has implications for Fylde. And that's why it's important to have members involved in it and get the full presentation, where you will get much more information as we go. This is the very first step. So I don't anticipate a debate now. So Councillor Griffiths.
I was just going to say that through Freckleton Parish, myself and Councillor Trelfall from Fylde, we've been invited on Friday to interview,
Good.
to a presentation.
Yes, good. And that's really useful. And as Andrew said, they are quite well resourced and looking to do a lot of this. So I don't think that will be the challenge.
Just simply, was the four councillors' involvement just simply on a first served come first served basis? Because it's certainly something that I would.
Well, let me put it like this. I've already addressed this with the officers, and I said if there was somebody particularly that wanted, you know, all right, you're putting yourself forward. It doesn't have to be four, does it? I think it should be a small group, though.
Yeah, from discussion with Mark, I think his view was that rather than be canvassing views from the whole committee, something a smaller group's more manageable, but four was presumably a number plucked out of the air. I don't think there's any legal basis whether it's 3, 4, 5. It's not, you know, it's nothing more than that.
Particularly if you're keen on being involved. Yeah.
I think the importance is obviously that the group needs to be balanced, and it needs to take into account the locales. So it is involved in Newton, it is involved in Freckleton areas. So that, and obviously yourself, Chair, being the learned member of the committee, that would be the way to go. The meeting, is that the meeting on Friday? Is that what's at the assembly rooms? And is that an open meeting, or is it?
The parish council have been invited from 1:30.
Right.
I think it's a public meeting. I think it's from 3:30.
And the last point is: are these above ground cables, or are they supposed to be below ground?
Sorry to sort of project thing, but yeah, the intention is that the cabling will be buried underground. I think it's buried about 1 metre down, but there's all sorts of electromagnetic issues to think about, and you know, another technical matter that will need specialist input. But the substation building will very much be above ground.
I'm sure it'll report back to the wider committee. It sounds like a long-term plan, isn't it, really?
You know,
It will, and it will also be willing to take on any points that other members of the committee have got that they'd like to make represented. So, yeah.
Can we have a proposer for the two recommendations? Councillor Settle, let's have some. Councillor Collins, yes, okay. So all those in favour? Right, that's unanimous. And finally, the information item, which you can just have a look at yourself, but in some ways it's depressing and in some ways it's encouraging because, you know, it shows enforcement and it shows that we take trees seriously. And there you can see there's £11,000 fine for this particular company with £7,000 costs for this tree prosecution. So it is something in a way that we should welcome, but it's a shame that we have to do it. And lastly,
Why was the prosecution against the developer withdrawn?
The initial proposal was to prosecute the developer and the contractor. You have to obviously present evidence, and we had much better evidence against the contractor. We had CCTV of them committing the offence, whereas the evidence against the developer was more about, well, they instructed them, and when we interviewed them, the evidence that we gained from the interviews was non-committal. So we felt that we didn't have that great a case against them to justify having it was scheduled for 5 days in court. So justifying, you know, officers and legal representation for 5 days in court for something that we didn't have a strong case against. So we came to an arrangement whereby we would drop the prosecution against them, and the other guys would plead guilty on the basis of the video evidence. So that's where we went.
and finally, the list of appeals. There's one appeal at the back, which was dismissed, permission in principle for the erection of up to 2 dwellings. So
that's a permission in principle is a very high level type of outline application, and that was a site in the Greenbelt coming out of Freckleton towards Newton on the left hand side near where the garages are. So that was a very good statement that the application was thrown out there. We've got another application that's almost identical opposite the Burley Arms, which is going to appeal. So the inspector supported our view on the need for them to comply with the minor infill development requirements of the local plan that we talk about, and so that was very encouraging. So it really will help us win the other appeal, and will set hopefully the parameters in terms of how we respond to future applications of that nature, because we don't want 2 houses built in the green belt on the edge of Freckleton or on the edge of Wharton. We want to plan for the development.
And clearly this was a refusal by us, then they went to appeal, just to explain the sort of process for those of you who are new to this. And the inspector then considers it and then either upholds it or dismisses it, or throws it out. Another way of doing it. So on this occasion, upheld the decision of refusal by Fylde Council and dismissed the appeal from the applicant.